All right, Alicia and Brenda, I have 6 o'clock and all council members here. Is Channel 8 ready?
Emily, is Channel 8 ready?
Yes, Channel 8 is good to go.
Great, and we are recording.
Excellent. All right, welcome everyone to the October 19th, 2021 regular meeting of the Boulder City Council. We have one announcement tonight, which is our normal COVID-19 vaccination announcement. To get information about getting your vaccine and to sign up for notifications, you can go to www.bouldercounty.org/families/COVID-19/vaccines and get information about getting vaccinated. And with that, Alicia, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. And good evening, everyone. Councilmember Brockett.
Present.
Friend.
Hey, Alicia, I'm here.
Joseph is absent. Councilmember Nagel.
Here.
Swetlick.
Present.
Wallach.
Present.
Weaver.
Here.
Yates.
Here.
And Young.
Present.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Thank you. And our first item of business is to amend the agenda. We have 2 items to add under matters, items 8A and 8B, a discussion on disbanding the CU South Process Subcommittee and a discussion on adding gun violence prevention work to the work plan. Could I get a motion to amend the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any objections to adding those 2 items? Great, seeing none, we will do that. And with that, we had a unfortunate event early this morning that I would like to see if Nuria could tell us some more about. Nuria.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm actually going to let our fire chief, Chief Calderazzo, give us more of an update. But we had a unfortunate fire today, and I just want to thank the staff who reacted so quickly to support those residents that were caught in the fire. And so with that, Chief, I'll just let you take it away with an update.
Thanks, Nuria. Good evening, Council. Mike Calderazzo, Fire Chief. I just wanted to give you a brief update on the fire. I'm sure everyone has heard by now. About 3:30 this morning, we had an apartment fire in the Whittier Square apartment complex. It was upon arrival for our first due units, the roofs of, it's actually a 6-building complex if you're familiar with it. And it kind of goes from east to west or west to east, whichever orientation you prefer. And they're in paired buildings. And so when the units first arrived about 5 minutes after dispatch, the roofs of the westernmost buildings, the first 4, were already on fire, and there was fire coming through the roof of those buildings. The units that got there actually worked pretty darn hard and did a very good job of what we call a defensive operation, trying to prevent the fire from taking down the 5th and the 6th buildings on the east side of that complex. There were about 40 plus families that were clearly in bed at home at this time of the morning. And I have to say, if it wasn't for our firefighters and our police officers that arrived on the scene, it could have been much, much worse in terms of casualties. There actually weren't any that we were able to have among our responders or among the public. The residents who got out, many of them were actually awakened by the police officers, if not by others in the complex. So a lot of kudos to the officers who went knocking on doors to get folks out of there. And then later, those families were actually taken over to police headquarters and then helped there. We counted 83 units in the complex. And it's a little tough to access from different sides of it. So firefighters had a little bit of a challenge. It is a sprinklered building, but the fire had gotten above the sprinklers and actually burned through the roof line. And then there's actually a breezeway between the buildings, the paired buildings, and the fire actually traveled internally along that breezeway to catch basically all of the structures on fire. As of about an hour and a half ago, I was able to confirm that of all the owners / occupants of the structures, we've only been unable to account for 4 owners. And we're not even sure that they were there at the time of the fire or if they had occupants in there. We're just trying to confirm whether or not those folks were in there. And why that matters, not only is that a big deal, but we were not able to adequately search the first 2 buildings on the west side, on the west side of the complex, because of all of the buildings suffered some little bit of collapse here and there, but the first 4 buildings had some pretty good sizable collapses. And with the fire damage, the water damage, we were worried about putting folks inside those structures if we didn't have to, until we can figure out how to make sure that they're safe structurally to go in. So getting it down to 4 narrows down a lot. We hope that it actually gets down to 0, and we will have really dodged any serious injury or casualties from this incident. So as far as I know, even though we had a few people actually have to jump from 2nd floor balconies, no serious injuries were reported. Which is really, really remarkable and a good thing. Not good for the families. Our heart goes out to all of them that lost their homes or their belongings this evening, and hopefully we're getting them taken care of. But that's it in a nutshell. There is more certainly in the press release in terms of the number of firefighters. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has regarding the incident. But I also wanted to thank not just the police department for all their help. We even used their UAV team, their drone team, to search areas where we weren't comfortable putting a firefighter inside the structure. Really helpful. But also we had help from Open Space and Mountain Parks Rangers initially with traffic control. We had our fleet partners out there making sure our trucks were continuing to run during the incident. So a lot of help from a lot of different departments to help us accomplish our job, which we couldn't have done without them. So a lot of, and in fact, even our partner departments around us, so Louisville, Lafayette, Mountain View Fire, Boulder Rural Fire, all sent units into the city to cover the city because we put all of our units in on this fire. So they are my counterpart fire chiefs. We've all made mutual aid agreements to help each other, and they were able to help cover the city while we did that. So it was really a team effort in a lot of different ways to fight this fire. And thankfully at this point, we're not aware of any serious injuries. There were some pets we have not been able to account for. I know that's been a question as well. And so when we have an opportunity to get back into the structure, we'll certainly be looking for those. The last thing I did want to say in terms of the investigation and the origin and cause of the fire, we have ATF has graciously started assisting our own investigations team, and they began investigations today, but because we were still putting out hotspots as late this afternoon, they will continue the investigation tomorrow. They will do an in-depth look at areas of suspicion where they think the fire may have started, and hopefully we'll have an answer on cause and origin sometime tomorrow, if not the day after. But the heavy lift in terms of the investigation we expect will happen tomorrow. And that's all I have in brief. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Chief. And thanks to you and your whole department and to the police and the entire Boulder Police Department for all the work that you guys did at getting people out safely. Nothing more important in the jobs that you all do in the city. So thanks so much for your quick response. I do see we have a couple of hands here, and I will turn to those now. I've got Aaron and Mark. Aaron.
Well, first, let me echo Sam's thanks, Chief Calderoso. Appreciate so much the work that your department did and that the police department, and it was really heroic effort to make sure that no one was killed or seriously injured. So the whole community thanks you for that great effort.
Thank you, sir.
Just my one question would be for you, Ordinaria, who could speak to if I know there are members of the community that are eager to assist folks who have been displaced and lost their belongings and such. What are good ways for people to volunteer or donate to help folks out who've suffered through this tragedy?
That's a great question.
Oh, go ahead, Mike. Take it.
Sorry, so that is a great question. We got asked that a lot today, and we have actually some opportunities for folks to contribute or donate. And I think we have a slide even that we can tee up to share with folks. There's a few different opportunities. There is, you'll see in the middle bullet here, there are 3 fundamental ways to donate. Of course, the Red Cross was instrumental in helping the folks that went to the police department headquarters from the incident. And they're a big part in how we respond to many fires and helping residents out. So that's one way. That's a more general way to donate. There's the 1-800-HELP NOW. And then there's also the opportunity to text the Red Cross. But it's really the Red Cross that does a lot of work for and with residents, as well as for responders on scene. And so they're one of the biggest ways to help folks impacted by the fire and even folks who responded to it while they were there. So helping them helps everyone involved.
If I could just add to that before we move to the next question, I just want to note that they're not accepting clothing donations because of COVID, but they have been our main liaison. And to the chief's point, they were so instrumental in helping the folks in the immediate aftermath of those that had to evacuate. So if you are inclined, and we are so appreciative of our community that is helping their neighbors, that is a great way to use that intention and allow the Red Cross to help disperse that.
Thanks so much for that.
Thank you both. Aaron, it looks like that's all for you. Great. And then I've got Mark and Mary. Mark?
Yeah, I want to second what Aaron said, Chief. Thank you so much for the performance of your department and all the men. It would have been so much worse if you had not been there. Just 2 questions. One is actually for Nuria. The first question for you, Chief. Do we have any sense of how badly the buildings have been damaged? Any sense of whether they can be reconstructed or will have to be torn down and built anew?
That's a good question. So I was there on the scene. I'm a terrible engineer, I'll be honest with you up front. But I will say the first 4 buildings were heavily damaged, but the way that building is constructed, I mean, there's some, there are some fundamentals in there that are probably okay. Most of the damage was in the upper stories of the building, but there's a lot of water damage. And my guess is if the bones are still good, yes, but my guess is at the very top of that building, for sure, definitely going to need heavy rehab. But I don't know about the rest of it, or whether structurally it's truly unsound and they're not able to work with what's left.
Thank you. And my second question is for Nuria. Nuria, what are the scope of the types of assistance that we can provide for displaced residents? I mean,
I appreciate that. Again, we're letting the Red Cross really take the lead on it, and they are right now having those conversations with anyone who's displaced. They have the ability immediately to offer sort of basic needs, toiletries, blanket. They're also focusing on those that perhaps need some additional financial assistance as that moves forward. And we will continue to be in contact with them as they learn more. We will certainly be talking to them and see what else we need to do.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Mary?
And I too would like to echo the gratitude that my colleagues have expressed, so thank you. My question is, what kind of sheltering will the displaced individuals and families be receiving?
So it actually runs the gamut. I don't have info on those who don't have their own accommodations, but I know quite a few. In fact, even while we were on the scene today, we had a number who left to different locations and clearly had another place to go, but came back to see what was going on. So I can't give you numbers. I don't know for sure, but I know quite a few had alternatives. But for those who don't, I don't have a good answer. Maybe Nuria does.
Yeah, I'll only add, we were just in communication with the Red Cross just a few hours ago, and they had not mentioned that anyone needed further accommodations. Most people found sort of housing with friends or family members, but they also indicated that if anybody needed shelter, that they would be assisting in that regard. So again, we'll keep you updated as that moves forward, but they've done a terrific job and really appreciative of their work and partnership to help those that were impacted.
Thank you both. That's all I have.
Adam.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you as well, Chief, and the entire department. My question was, we don't have very many large structural fires, so when we do, I think it's a good opportunity to see if the resources and everything that is required to handle, especially if there were multiple incidences in a short amount of time or something along those lines. Do you feel confident that we were capable and had everything we needed for this and anything else that may have come up at the same time?
That's a fantastic question. I think we did. And I think what's really neat about these incidents, if anything, if there's a silver lining in them, is how well we're able to partner with some of the other outside agencies to help cover us as we do for them. So it's a give and take. If another community has an issue, we go and help them as much as they come in and cover for us. I was able to actually put every unit I have on this incident and to successfully use every piece of equipment that we needed for the fire and allow my partners to come in and take over different parts of the city while we were handling this incident. And I think that is what you'd want in regional cooperative agreements and mutual aid agreements. And so that is what I consider some of the better cases of cooperation in public safety services as a model throughout the country that most try to achieve. And it was on evidence. It was evident today on that scene.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Adam. Nuria.
Yep, I just wanted to add, as I'm getting some additional notes from staff, and in the vein of thank yous for all those that are helping, we had the executive director, Jen Crowell of Barha, reached out to us as well to see if they could help with housing, and they were connected directly to the Red Cross. So just wanted to thank them for their work. And then CU, who's always been a partner with the city, they're providing housing and food for any CU students who lost their apartments. And so while we don't have the numbers on where everyone has gone, I just wanted to take a quick moment and give a shout out to everyone who's been assisting.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Nuria. And Chief, Nuria, maybe to both of you, I have a couple questions. One is about when we will have a full search done. How long do you think it will be before we've, in the overhaul and salvage operation, been able to kind of check in on each of the apartments and make sure that pets and or folks that we may not have otherwise found? When will we have a physical inspection of the entire property completed?
So I'm going to guess here. The first thing is to make sure, as you know, to finish the investigation. And so we're going to let them do that. But at the same time, so that's probably going to take another day or two. We're going to try to assess the structure itself so that we can see if we can get into it and wherever we think we might have maybe pets or I don't think. If we're down to 4, that's key. 4 folks unaccounted for in terms of owners. If we can get a hold of those folks and see where their units are in the structure, we can actually focus the search there rather than try to do a unit by unit search, especially if we don't need to. So it'll probably take a few more days before we can get back in there. I would hope by the end of the week, we can have an assessment to get in there and do whatever we need to do to confirm that we have no victims, or the pets are all accounted for, kind of thing. So that's our plan going forward, and hopefully we can get with those who have unaccounted for pets, so they can tell us where the search needs to be done.
All right, perfect. That's great. And then the last thought I had was, as we go through the recovery process and the salvage and overhaul, I don't know if it's appropriate, but it certainly seems like we have the Boulder Strong Resource Center that we established after the shooting. And I don't know, is there any possible collaboration as far as directing victims there who might need some kind of support?
I believe so. I know we are working, I know we're reaching out as we move forward. And part of what we're trying to do is make sure that we have an assessment on what folks' needs are. And we have certainly also sent a note to staff, who we also don't want to forget are courageous enough to go in circumstances and face potential tragedies every day. And we want to make sure that's a resource to them as well. But we will be looking at that, Sam. I think that's a great suggestion. And I think by tomorrow, we'll have a better assessment on who needs what and who hasn't been able to connect to folks as we move forward.
All right. That is excellent. Again, thank you to all involved, all of our staff, the police, the fire, fighters, as well as everybody who supported this work. And good to hear that the mutual aid agreements worked as they're intended to do. So again, thanks to everyone, and keep us posted, please, on developments as we go forward. With that, I think we're ready to move to open comment. And as part of that, I'm going to try and remember to turn to Brenda. And Brenda, if you could walk us through the rules of public comment, that'd be great.
Thank you, Sam. Let me get the correct screen pulled up here. Sorry that it wasn't ready to go. All right, and I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
I can see it.
Great. So just as a reminder to all those who are participating both in open comment and in our public hearings tonight, that the city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and council members, and supports democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. There's more information about this vision and the work that was done to create it on the Productive Atmospheres page of our website. The easiest way is to search those words from our homepage. A few examples, that's not what I wanted to do. A few examples of what we're talking about when we talk about guidelines to support the vision are: all remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. And participants are required to register to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. If you need your name changed and you don't know how to do so, please reach out to me in the Q&A box, and I'm happy to change it for you. And with that, Sam, we are ready to begin.
Great. Thank you very much, Brenda. And we have 5 speakers signed up for open comment tonight. Each speaker will have 2 minutes, and speakers are requested not to address any of the 4 items that we have at the public hearing tonight. This is open comment and not public hearing on any of the specific items that we have to hear later on. With that, our first 3 speakers are Brian Marin, Lynn Siegel, and Kim McCarthy. Brian, when you are ready, you will have 2 minutes.
Hi, good evening. I believe I'm signed up for the public hearing. I got the email confirming the time for public hearing. It's on the budget.
Yes, that'll be later. I believe that's the third or fourth item we have tonight. Let me look.
Now, I didn't get a confirmation email for any kind of public comment. I'd like to speak in public hearing, and I did get a confirmation for that.
Okay, very good. So that'll be item 5C is the budget, Brian, and we'll make sure that you are slotted in for that. Next, then we have Lynn Siegel, Kim McCarthy, and Patrick Murphy. Lynn.
Well, I got an announcement that I was approved for open comment, but I didn't get a listing of the open comment people. And I got 2 listings of the public hearing people, a revised version. So I'm kind of confused too. So where is the timer, Sam? I don't see it.
It's up now.
There we go. Okay. Yeah. As recently as 1992, Hogan Pancoast was a beautiful wetland with entirely too much water for development. In 94, the owner of Hogan Pancoast dumped 43 truckloads of unpermitted fill dirt on this land to cover up the water. In 2002, the land was sold to the current owners. They hired a consultant who recommended that the remainder of the wetlands be filled, be ready to ready the site for development. In February of 2008, the owners took the consultant's advice and filled in the wetlands without a permit. Our city council wrote to the commissioners begging them to require restitution and restoration. Both the commissioners and the developers ignored city council's pleas, and the city was left helpless. Nothing you can do about it. The property lies in the county outside of your jurisdiction. These same owners have now decided that they are ready to have their land annexed into our city. Council members they snubbed in 2008, Morzell and Applebaum, are absent tonight. This was written in 2008, so this is nothing new with CU South. 54% of all U.S. wetlands have been drained or filled for development purposes. How sad that a town once admired as environmental trendsetters is now poised to reward purposeful wetland destruction. A vote in favor of annexation will condone crimes against the earth. A vote in favor of annexation will establish a precedent cementing the fact that intentionally destroying wetlands is an acceptable procedure for getting your land annexed into Boulder, Colorado. And they said also, tonight you can choose to hear your community and hear your appointed planning board. Apparently the planning board was on the right side of that, or you can choose to ignore us. This is someone that wrote that in 2008. So deja vu all over again with CU South. No on CU South. Shame on you.
Thank you, Lynn. Next, we have Kim McCarthy, Patrick Murphy, and Chris Wolfman. Kim, you're up with 2 minutes.
Hi, all. This is actually really difficult for me to admit publicly, but this is a community concern. I live in a Boulder Housing Partners community, specifically Bridgewalk. And when I first signed my lease, that's when the problem started. My husband needed a handicap placard and they refused, ignored, or declined to put up the placard or the sign and a dedicated parking space. This continued on until we had a rodent infestation and I was not getting any type of resolution or response from Boulder Housing Partners, who I'll refer to as BHP. So much so that I had to call Denver Fox News Consumer Reports to have them come out. And they finally did, at which point BHP management agreed to come out and mitigate the rodent infestation. Through that process, I was physically assaulted twice by their employees. After going through a lot of this complaining, they forced me through a grievance process that is unproductive and bullies me. They have sent out demands that requires me to get an attorney to respond to them, telling them that this is an illegal and unrespondable demand. I had to go through mediation. I just now had public health come out. Through mediation, they violated the terms by sending me a demand and publicly posting what was said on my door. I just recently had public health come out and only investigate my property, my unit, And now my family has to get tested for the HATMA virus. And that is exactly not what you want in Boulder or Colorado. Now we all have to get tested within 2 days. BHP needs to be accountable.
Thank you, Kim. Next, we have Patrick Murphy, and we will close with Chris Wolfman. Patrick?
My name is Patrick Murphy. I've lived in Boulder 52 years. Climate change is an existential threat, yet not one public meeting of the Excel Partnership Advisory Panel has occurred in the 11 months since the Muni effort died. I've presented a fast and efficient carbon reduction plan to City Council members that would meet with me. Mark Wallach refused to meet with me and is running to stay on council. His claims to listen to the public are evidently just lip service. So I'll present that plan in increments so Mark can hear them. Here's solar. To be equitable based on usage, with the assumption that large electric usage is from higher income and low usage from lower income homes, provide a sliding scale of incentives with larger incentives for smaller installations. Slide 2, please. And larger incentives for small installations. This is a one-time payment with decades of value. For example, a $2,000 incentive, which I received from Excel in 2011, nets $8.33 a month over the 20 years. Since solar costs have dropped a lot since 2011, a smaller incentive might achieve the same result. Boulder currently collects about $7 million a year in carbon taxes. So what if 2.2 million were repurposed for real carbon reduction, 200,000 for administration, and the remaining 2 million for solar incentives would result in 1,000 homes with solar. Since only about 1 in 7 homes is actually suitable for solar, that means every solar capable home in Boulder could have solar in 6 years or less. Slide 3. There would still be about $5 million in carbon taxes left over. Just look at all the solar capable business roofs in one small part of Boulder. Slide 4. The planet burns, floods, and dies, while Boulder fiddles.
Thank you, Patrick. Next, we have Chris Wolfman. Chris?
I don't see Chris in the meeting, Sam. So perhaps, Chris, if you're here under a different name, maybe you can raise your hand using the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. And I am not seeing hands being raised.
I don't see it either, Brenda. Thank you. And with that, we will bring open comment to a close and bring it back to council. I'll turn to you, Nuria and Sandra, to start with. Nuria, do you have any comments on what we heard tonight?
I do not. Thank you, Sam. And as always, thank folks for commenting.
Great. Thank you. And Sandra?
I do not either. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Council members, Aaron, I see your hand up.
Yeah, well, just in regards to the testimony from Ms. McCarthy about some challenges she's having working with Boulder Housing Partners, I believe she's written us a couple emails. I wonder if if the city, maybe our mediation service, could contact her and maybe see if there's any way that we could help, resolve the sounds like some kind of a dispute or issues that they're having between each other.
I'm happy to talk to staff and see what's been done or not done, and perhaps we can do more in terms of contacting mediation on that. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Aaron. Any other council responses? Great. Seeing none with that, I think we are ready to move on. Alicia.
All right, sir. Our next item on tonight's agenda is the consent agenda, which includes items A through N.
Thanks very much. And council, are there any questions, comments, feedback, or a motion on the consent agenda? Rachel?
I will make a motion in a minute, but I do have a question on item 3H, which is about special districts in a general improvement district, an eco passes in one neighborhood, Forest Glen, I think it is. And I just haven't seen anything like that. So I was wondering kind of how that works and why that works. And just wanted some information on it because it was intriguing.
Very good. I think I may have asked that question in a previous year as well. So staff, any response to the Forest Glen Transit Pass?
Sure, I'm happy to take a little bit and provide some more information as we get into the budget presentation, but it's a funding mechanism for a particular area to fund their EcoPass through an additional levy on the property tax. And so we show it as a separate district, and that's how you approve the budget.
And could I ask just a quick question there? Is it because it is property tax that we call it out differently than other neighborhood eco passes?
I believe it's because we set it up as a general improvement district, so it needs to be separated out from the fund. And I see our Assistant Director of Finance, Cara Skinner, as well. So happy to defer if I've missed anything on that as well.
That's correct. It is because they have a separate mill levy that, and they are a district. So there are certain requirements for approving that in a specific way.
Okay, thanks. Well, you know, it's really hard to get an eco pass for neighborhoods. So I was just curious, like, why that path was chosen, and maybe that's a different. There's a different day for this conversation, but you know, if that works well, is that something that we want to replicate? Is it something that needs to be revoted on occasionally if neighbors don't end up liking the levy? I'm just kind of curious on the whole dynamics and if that's something that we should be. Aaron, looks like Aaron may have some information. No question, different. Anyways, I'm just, I don't know if tonight's the right night to ask this because it's sort of in the weeds, but it's intriguing if it's something that we should be doing in more places. I don't know, maybe Sam, that's a question that's been asked and answered a few years ago.
I only asked it for the same reason that you did. It came up to the top, you know, it's highlighted as a specific item. And I think it's a general improvement district. It's a great question as to whether it's a good way to do it or not. I don't know. Aaron, is this a colloquy or something separate? No, not a colloquy. Okay. Anything else on that, Rachel?
No, I'm happy to make a motion to pass the consent agenda if it's helpful. So moved.
Great.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll turn to Aaron. Aaron?
Well, I just wanted to speak briefly to 3N, which is about changing some parking regulations in parks and open space. And just want to call out that seemed like a really great process that was followed, you know, that a proposal was put out by staff to tweak the parking hours slightly to account for some issues that have arisen. You know, it was shown to the community, it was worked through the open space board. They came up with a consensus decision. It's a very reasonable change. And now it's on our consent agenda. So I just want to call that out as a great way of letting a board do the legwork on a proposal with the community. And so kudos to everyone involved, and we can continue to look for other opportunities to let boards do that kind of work on smaller proposals like that.
Great. All right, we have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. Rachel or Mary, do you want to speak to it, or shall we just move on to a vote? All right, sounds like we're ready to move on. Alicia, I have this as a roll call vote. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
All right, please take us through.
Thank you. Councilmember Young.
Yes.
Brockett.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes.
Nagel.
Aye.
Swetlick.
Yes.
Wallach.
Aye.
Weaver.
Aye.
And Yates.
Yes.
Sir, the consent agenda passed with a vote 8-0.
Excellent. And if you would take us to the next item, please.
All righty. Our next item on tonight's agenda is our public hearings, item number 5. Item 5A is the consideration of a motion to approve the selection of the city attorney.
Excellent. And with that, I will turn to our recruitment subcommittee, Bob and Rachel.
Rachel, do you want to speak first or you want me to go?
Please go ahead. I'm still downloading something.
Okay, I'm happy to. Well, Rachel and I were tasked several months ago with a process to present to council our recommendations on our new city attorney. Council members have had the opportunity. This is the second time we've gone through this process. You might recall that we got down to finalists last time, and then council collectively decided to go back out and see what other applicants there might be. We did a second round of applications. We received some really good applications the second time. It was a winnowing process. We went, I think, from 12 applications to 7 to 5. Those were interviewed. Council then selected 3 finalists out of that group, and they were again interviewed. The recommendation that Rachel and I are making is for the appointment as our next city attorney of a woman named Teresa Taylor Tate. Up until recently, she has been the deputy city attorney for the city of Longmont. That's our recommendation. I'll have a couple other comments in a few minutes, but I wanted to pause there with our recommendation, see if Rachel has some comments to add to that.
No, I think you covered it well. We did have 3 outstanding finalists, and it was a hard decision, and we appreciate, as the subcommittee, everyone from staff and our colleagues working so hard to do this process twice. It's been long and beleaguering, so thanks for sticking with us. And I do have formal motion language when the time's right.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So I would like to start with council questions or comments. Then we have a public hearing on this, and then we'll return to council for final discussion and any vote. So any council questions or comments before we go to public hearing? Aaron.
Well, I just thought we'd do comments after the public hearing, maybe per usual.
Yeah, that's just fine. If we don't have anything ahead of time, no questions or comments, I would move right into the public hearing. All right, with that, let me pull up my public hearing list. All right, so let's open the public hearing. We have 1 member of the public signed up for this. It is Lynn Siegel. Lynn, because we only have 1, there'll be 3 minutes per speaker. Lynn Siegel, you are up with 3 minutes.
This is the public hearing on what?
On the appointment of the new city attorney.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize there were 3. There was budget and another one too. I don't really have anything to say about the public attorney, except that I'd like to see a much more robust inclusion of the public in this choice, because boy, we fight it once we have that person in there and they get a living H to deal with. And so it'd be a lot nicer if we had a way of really knowing a lot more about who's coming in, instead of given the last 2 or 3 people who have applied and haven't been really part of the process very much, don't have a deep background on any of them, and don't have a way to really look through and see if those 3 were the right ones to be chosen from a list of 60. It's really not a very open process, and I just can't really support anybody that you choose, but you can bet that I'll be complaining about them once they're in, and it'd be nice if that were not the case.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. And with that, we will bring the public hearing to a close and bring it back to council. Bob, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment on my own recommendation. As Rachel said, this was a very difficult decision. We had 3 extremely well-qualified candidates. One of our candidates was internal, and that made the decision in some regards even more difficult, because we will always want to encourage our employees, our city employees, to apply for opportunities to expand and grow. We did not take this decision lightly. We want to continue to encourage all employees in the city to apply for positions that give them the opportunity to grow and expand. And so the fact that we're not recommending the internal candidate should not be taken by anyone as a reflection on our discouragement of candidates within the city to apply. And we hope that continues. As a matter of fact, I think one of the lessons learned, at least for me in this process, is I think we need to do a better job of letting internal candidates know about opportunities and affirmatively encouraging them to apply for positions.
Very good. Mary.
I'd like to agree with Bob with respect to this is not reflection on anything that had to do with the quality of candidates that we received. I also think that one of the things that we need to do is address whatever barriers that there might be for internal candidates in applying, and maybe even set up some sort of program that encourages and develops employees, which we have a most excellent staff, to aspire to the top roles within the city. So, for example, we addressed one of the barriers between the first set of candidates and the second set of candidates, and that was the residency requirement. And that seemed to make quite a big difference. And it makes me wonder what other barriers we have in the system. I also think that our process tends to really be biased towards going out and looking outside of the city organization. And how can that be made more welcoming toward internal candidates? Again, because I think we have excellent staff that should not be discouraged from aspiring to those top roles. And so I very much agree with Bob. And for me, it was a very, very difficult decision. Yeah, I will be supporting the nominated candidate, but I just want to be clear that it was a very difficult decision for me.
Thank you, Mary. Aaron.
Yeah, I'll agree with that as well. It's a very difficult, challenging decision. I'll be supporting the recommendation of the subcommittee. I appreciate all the work, Bob and Rachel, that you did with the 2 rounds. But just want to say, Sandra, you've done a phenomenal job as interim city attorney, and I want to really thank you so much for the work that you've been doing, and just say that I really look forward to continuing to work together. I think you and Ms. Taylor-Tate will make a great team in the city attorney's office, and very much value all the work that you've done and look forward to all the work that we'll continue to do together. So thanks again for all of your efforts.
Thank you, Aaron. Anyone else wish to weigh in? I'll jump in then. I want to say that I will be supporting the recommendation that's being brought forward tonight. I will also say, like my fellow colleagues, that it was a very difficult decision to arrive at. There were lots of discussions and trade-offs, and it is a reflection of the high quality of the candidates that we had that it was such a difficult decision. I want to thank also Bob and Rachel for all the work that you've had to do. I know that this was a heavy lift. And I will also thank Sandra very much for stepping up into the interim city attorney role. You've been excellent, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done. And like Aaron, I look forward to, well, I won't personally be here to do work going into the future, but I look forward to you being able to continue to support council in the city with your great work. With that, Nuria, I know that you had asked to say a few words as well, so I'd like to turn to Nuria and any wisdom you might have on this issue.
Oh, I appreciate that, Sam, and I don't know that I have a lot of wisdom, but I will say that I have a tremendous amount of gratitude and appreciation to Sandra. I will say I'm excited to work with Teresa. I'm sure that she will serve our enterprise well if this moves forward and is approved, but I cannot speak highly enough of Sandra's work in the short time that I have known her. It has been 5 months, really, that I have seen Sandra leap into that void that Tom Carr left as he moved on, and can only say that she has been a tremendous leader thoughtful about her advice. And I've seen her be so incredibly inclusive with her team and allowing those team members to grow and be empowered and work on a variety and multitude of projects that have been really complex and difficult throughout the city. And so I know her to be a truly servant leader. I think she has been a critical part of our entire city leadership team. And I know and hope that we will continue to benefit from Sandra's insight and leadership well into the future. And I believe I speak wholeheartedly, not just for myself, Sandra, but for your entire leadership team, in just a huge gratitude for all you've done.
Thank you very much, Nuria. All right, with that, one last invitation for council comments. All right, seeing none, do we have a motion? Rachel?
Yep, the committee recommends council consideration of this matter and action in the form of this motion. Motion to accept the recommendation of the Council Recruitment Committee to appoint Teresa Taylor Tate as city attorney and to authorize Mayor Sam Weaver and City Manager Nuria Rivera Vandermeide to execute an employment contract with Ms. Taylor Tate, including the terms set forth in the agenda memo. So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and I'm not sure the protocol here, but Alicia, if you wouldn't mind taking us through a roll call vote, please.
Yes, sir, of course. Councilmember Brockett.
Aye.
Friend.
Yes.
Nagel.
Aye.
Sweatlet.
Yes.
Wallach.
Aye.
Weaver.
Aye.
Yates.
Yes.
And Young.
Yes.
Sir, the selection for the position of city attorney being Teresa Taylor Tate has been approved 8-0.
Very good. Thank you very much. And Sandra, thank you again for serving as interim city attorney and for all the work you've done for the city so far. And
Mayor Weaver, I hope it's okay. I would just like to say a few words.
Please do.
Thank you so much. I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate and welcome Teresa Tate to the city's organization and to the city attorney's office. I look forward to getting to know you better and working collaboratively together. I would also like to thank City Council for providing me with the opportunity to lead this great city's legal work during the interim period. It has been an honor to serve the community in this way. I would also like to thank the city departments and leadership for supporting me and the city attorney's office during this transition. To my colleagues at the city attorney's office, I am deeply grateful and proud of your dedication, professionalism, and commitment by going above and beyond in supporting the city's legal work each and every day, and particularly during the last 6 months of transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. And that was wonderful. And I want to echo your sentiment that we look forward to bringing Teresa into the fold of the city of Boulder. So with that, any further comments by council? All right, seeing none, Alicia, could you take us to the next item?
Yes, sir. Our next item on tonight's agenda is item 5B, which is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt Ordinance 8504, changing licensing requirements for marijuana key holders, circuses, carnivals, and menageries, mobile food vehicles, itinerant merchants, tobacco retailers, and secondhand dealers and pawnbrokers by amending Title IV, License and Permits, Section 6-14-8, requirements related to operation of medical marijuana businesses, 6-16-8, requirements related to operation of recreational marijuana businesses, and 9-6-6, mobile food vehicle sales, BRC 1981, and setting forth related details.
Excellent. Thank you, Alicia. Nuria.
Yep, I see Mashawn Cook is ready for action as she moves us forward on this item.
Thank you. So if we could have the presentation, please. Thank you very much. So good evening, Council. I'm Ms. Shawn Cook. I'm the licensing manager with the City of Boulder. So this evening, we're before you with some requested changes to the miscellaneous licenses that we process. So we are recommending changes to Title IV, which are general licenses, general city licenses, and also a change to Title VI, which is the medical marijuana and recreational marijuana code. With me this evening is also Detective Edmund Burke, and he will provide additional comment and is able to answer any questions having to do with more detailed changes to the secondhand dealer license type. So with that, you can take us to the next slide, please. So the first change or the first comment that I will make is we have reached out to both internal and external customers prior to coming to council for these particular changes. We have informed our Cannabis Licensing and Advisory Board of the recommended change to marijuana key holders so that we take a marijuana, a key holder form as opposed to an application and a fee. We've also reached out to Boulder County Health Department. They're a close partner of ours having to do with mobile food vehicles in particular. So we've let them know our intended changes. We've held meetings with the Sales Tax Department, which handles city business licensing, general city business licensing. We've talked to Boulder Fire, who is also a close partner with ours, having to do with mobile food vehicles. And here this evening, in addition to having conversations with the Boulder Police Department, you'll also hear from Detective Burke this evening. In addition to that, we have sent an email to all miscellaneous licenses who currently hold the 4 license types that we're suggesting changing from 1 year to 2 year. So all of our current licensees, we have reached out via email, and we held 1 call-in session on September 23rd and also allowed them to submit email comments if they wish to our main email account. And we didn't have anyone call in during our call-in session, and we haven't received any email comments, which was negative for the change. So, okay, next slide. So the part 1 changes that we are suggesting is we are suggesting changing our current process for city licensing for marijuana key holders from an application, which is about 10 pages long, or it was 10 pages long, with a city fee that we collect and process, instead to a 1-page disclosure form for marijuana city key holders. We put this in place temporarily to see how it would work. We started that on September 1st, and that has been very positively received from the business owners. We feel that this keeps the requirement to disclose city key holders to the city having to do with marijuana licenses, but it eliminates a fee for businesses of $150 per application. And it also saves hours of processing time for city licensing staff. So next slide. So the one comment that I will make in regards to our recommendation to change 1-year licenses instead to 2-year licenses is we feel that this will reduce the potentiality that we will need to request an additional licensing staff person by reducing the number of renewal applications and also marijuana key holder applications that we receive every year. In addition to that, it will maintain the information that we receive, proper information for city enforcement, city license requirements enforcement, and it also maintains the application fees at a level that should cover processing costs for our office to do that type of work. Next slide. And with that, I will hand over the presentation to Detective Edmund Burke, having to do with secondhand dealer changes.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. I'm Detective Ed Burke, and I'm with the Boulder Police Department. I'm the pawn detective here at the PD, and among other investigative responsibilities, I oversee compliance regarding the businesses in Boulder that are identified as secondhand dealers, as well as the reviewing and inspecting of the transaction slips that are completed by the employees at these businesses when purchases are made. Much of what is contained within the proposed changes to the Boulder Revised Code relates to clarifying the expectation of secondhand dealers by the city of Boulder. The BRC relating to secondhand dealers has not been updated since the 80s. And in regards to businesses that the BRC defines as secondhand dealers, they are actually considered as pawnbrokers by state law in the Colorado revised statutes. Many of the changes proposed to the revised code ensure that the expectations of pawnbrokers between the state law and BRC are consistent and are also clearly defined. These definitions and expectations include a 30-day holding period for purchased items, with purchased items being kept separate and apart, as well as all items valued at more than $30 necessitate documentation to the police department. The other recommendation that is being made will ensure that all transaction slips for these purchases will be documented on an electronic format, which will reduce staffing time, increase the accuracy of recording the information, and also allow for photographic record of the transactions. These proposed changes will ultimately ensure that the BRC is compliant with state law and ultimately will improve the recovery of stolen items by law enforcement. I'll now turn it back over to Ms. Cook unless there's any questions for me.
Thank you. All right, next slide, please. So again, I alluded to this earlier in our presentation, but an overarching recommendation that we're bringing to council today is to change one-year license terms from itinerant merchant licenses, which are door-to-door sales licenses, for secondhand dealer licenses and pawnbroker licenses, for mobile food vehicle licenses, and also for tobacco retailer licenses. We are recommending that the license term be changed from 1 year to 2 year. What the 2-year license will allow us to do is it will allow us to stagger renewals. So we'll only process half of the renewals on any given year. And it also adds in an ability in those license types for summary suspensions in the instance where a business fails some sort of health and safety yearly inspection. So I'll give you an example. So for mobile food vehicle licenses, those license types need to be inspected and approved by Boulder County Health because they're making food. And then in addition to that, they need to be inspected by Boulder Fire. They need to be passed by Boulder Fire. So if it is a 2-year license, on the second year, after the mobile food vehicle licensee is licensed, we will have an ability to summarily suspend the license until the particular business passes their fire inspection and also passes their health inspection. And once those health and safety inspections are remedied, then we can go ahead and lift that city license suspension. All right, and last slide. And that's it for our presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michonne, for that. I thought the memo on this subject was extremely clear and very well written. So thanks very much for that. Council members, any questions? All right. If there are no questions, Mary.
Yes. Thank you, Michonne, for the presentation. My questions are fairly straightforward. On the marijuana key holders, and one of the reasons that this is changing is because there are no longer background checks required. Could you go over what is behind there no longer being background checks?
So that actually is a change that we put in place a couple of years ago. And this, to me, sort of seems like the next logical, evolution of that. So the circumstance is probably with many other types of businesses, there's a great deal of turnover. And so we, it's that way with bars and restaurants as well. But we reserve our background checking and our vetting and our financial reviews now for owners, officers, managing members, those people that actually can exercise control and oversight of marijuana businesses. It is the case for city key holders that they need to be background checked by the state division in any event. So they have to have a state card, whether it be a support card or a key card or something like that. So we do ask for the state number on the key holder form. So we know that they've been background checked by the state, but it really is just a one-page disclosure form to the city office now. So that's what we were.
Okay, great, thank you. And also, I was not entirely clear if the ordinance changes, the ones that are the 6 ordinance changes on, it is page 5 of the memo and packet page 283. There are 6 changes, and are those 6 changes making the definitions consistent, changing the record keeping, etc.? Are those basically taking the state law and aligning the BRC with the state law?
I probably will defer to Detective Burke and perhaps Kathy Haddock, but what I would say is it's the reverse. We are aligning the Boulder Revised Code with the state law, which is applicable to that particular business type. What we have found is that there, quite honestly, is some confusion with businesses. You know, I know I have to follow the state law, but the city law is different. It has different time periods. It has different values. I mean, you know, which one shall I follow? And we're making it consistent between the 2 applicable laws. So.
Okay, great. Just wanted to be clear on that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. All right, council, any other questions? All right, with that, we will go to the public hearing. We have 1 person signed up for the public hearing tonight. That is Lynn Siegel. So Lynn, you will have 3 minutes. And the subject is licensing.
Lynn, you should be able to unmute now. Sam, Lynn's mute button is activated, but it doesn't look like she is able to unmute.
Yeah, I see her here as a attendee. Lynn, for some reason, you're muted. There you are.
Sorry, I had to go get some warm clothes. I'm freezing. It's 50 degrees in my house.
All right. Okay. We'll go ahead and start the timer then, and you have 3 minutes.
So what is this hearing for?
It's about licensing of various kinds of businesses, including pawnbrokers and marijuana dispensaries.
Oh, okay. I'd say no pawnbrokers and no marijuana industries whatsoever should be licensed in Boulder at all. But I'm a prohibitionist too, unlike Bob Yates. So that's just me. I don't believe in any kind of drugs. What the struggles that we have going on in the world, the starving people, we don't need to be pawnbroking. We don't need to be marijuana dealing. We don't need to be dealing drugs and alcohol or any of that. We need to make our world a fairer place. Then we can do that kind of stuff, but not before. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. With that, I will bring the public hearing to a close, bring it back to council. Any further discussion, questions, or motion? Mary.
I'll move I move to adopt Ordinance 8405, changing licensing requirements for marijuana key holders, circuses, carnivals, and menageries, mobile food vehicles, itinerant merchants, tobacco retailers, and secondhand dealers and pawnbrokers by amending Title IV, Licenses and Permits, Section 6-4-8, requirements related to operation of medical marijuana, 6-16-8, requirements related to operation of recreational marijuana businesses, and 9-6-6, mobile food vehicle sales, BRC 1981, and setting forth related details.
Thank you, Aaron. Aaron, okay, perfect. Aaron seconded, so we have motion and a second. Mary, would you like to speak to your motion?
Anything that updates our code that hadn't been updated since the 1980s is a fabulous thing to do. So all for it.
Great, thanks, Mary. Aaron?
Well, we just know how much of a problem that the carnival and menagerie regulations have been over the last couple of decades. So this is a long overdue update to those. But in all seriousness, I appreciate how this is kind of smoothing things over and reducing kind of bureaucratic drag on city staff and on some of our businesses locally. So thanks for this work. I appreciate it.
Great, thanks, Aaron. And I'll jump in and say it looks like this will save a serious amount of paperwork time for at least one staff member. And so it looks like these are an efficiency improvement as well as everything else that goes along with it. I have to say that I do love the categories that are being amended. Itinerant merchant is not something I was familiar with until the update. So that's great. This all looks like really good work. And I agree with Mary that we should endeavor to make sure that we review our code more frequently if we can find these kind of improvements in it. So with that, any other comments? Doesn't look like it. So Alicia, is this a show of hands or is this a roll call?
This is a roll call, sir.
Excellent. Could you please take us through that?
Yes, sir, of course. Councilmember Friend.
Yes.
Nagel.
Aye.
Swetlick.
Yes.
Wallach.
Aye.
Weaver.
Aye.
Yates.
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
And Brockett.
Aye.
Sir, Ordinance 8409 was adopted 8-0.
Excellent. And thank you to everyone who brought this forward. And Alicia, if you could please take us on to the next item.
Thank you.
Our next item is item 5C. It is the consideration of the following items relating to the 2022 budget. Item number 1 is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt Ordinance 8505, adopting the budget for the city of Boulder, Colorado for the fiscal year commencing on the first day of January 2022 and ending on the last day of December 2022, and setting forth related details. Item number 2 is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt Ordinance 8506, establishing the 2021 City of Boulder property tax mill levies, which are to be collected by the County of Boulder, State of Colorado, within the City of Boulder in 2022 for payment of expenditures by the City of Boulder, County of Boulder, State of Colorado, and setting forth related details. Item number 3, the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt Ordinance 8507, appropriating money to defray expenses and liabilities of the City of Boulder, Colorado for the 2022 fiscal year of the City of Boulder, commencing on the first day of January 2022 and ending on the last day of December 2022, and setting forth related details. And item number 4, the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt Ordinance 8508, amending Chapter 4-20, titled Fees, and Section 3-8-3, titled Tax Imposed on Non-Residential and Residential Development, BRC 1981, changing certain fees, and setting forth related details.
Thank you, Alicia and Nuria.
Thank you, Sam. And I will invite Mark Wolf to walk us through a short presentation, sort of reminding us all on where we were on the budget at first reading.
All right. Good evening, Council. Can you see my slides all right?
Can.
Perfect. So as Nuria said, you will just hear from me this evening, but we have a number of city staff here to answer any questions that may arise. We'll go through this presentation fairly quickly, just knowing that we spent quite a lot of time going through a detailed presentation of the recommended 2022 budget, but we'll touch on a few points this evening, including recapping some of our major themes, our CIP, and address some of the questions that we have heard coming in over the last couple of weeks. So as a reminder, we are proposing a $462.5 million budget that's split across a $300 million proposed operating budget and a little over $162.4 million capital budget, which represents a fairly significant increase over last year, mostly due to a large $90+ million bond issue in utilities. There is a lot on this slide. What I will point you to is Appendix A of your packet information on this item that outlines the changes year over year and going back pre-pandemic to 2019 actuals against our 2022 proposed budget by department. The reason we're giving you this information is there was some conversation of trying to look at an apples to apples comparison pre-pandemic to where we are now. And with that, we had to make a number of adjustments to give you that apples to apples comparison. You will notice some larger figures there that jump out when we're looking at compound annual growth rate over the years. Obviously, a lot happens during that period of time. So we tried to take some of those out, make those adjustments to have it make sense. Any adjustments we made are caveated within that information. There are more detailed notes in the appendix, which helps with some of these larger percent amounts to give you an idea of what the changes were from 19 to the recommended budget in 2022. As we discussed last time talking about the budget, we are making a number of investments across restoration of services, including community engagement, so library hours and services, cultural arts grants, HOP service, and many others. Represents about $9.4 million in investment in restoration. We do continue to innovate and strive towards service excellence. We have made a number of recommended enhancements in the recommended budget, including to our equity program, advanced life support, substance abuse programming, and many others, a little over $8 million. We continue to try to get back to where we were in terms of investment in our employees, and also recognize the sacrifice that they have made during the pandemic. That represents a little $3.3 million. That is in addition to the staffing increases that we hope will help with capacity issues across the organization. And last, capital improvements, as I mentioned, $162 million budget there, major investments in water, wastewater, stormwater projects. That also includes alpine balsam flood mitigation, soil health projects, and multimodal enhancements. And this slide is to address some of the questions that we've had coming in related to arts and culture budget. What you see here is a multi-year representation of arts and culture budget. The blue bar is the total division budget. The orange bar is included in that, but that breaks out the cultural grants that go out to organizations every year. What you see in 2020 does not represent the cuts that we had to take due to the pandemic. There were adjustments mid-year. There was a significant reduction, and then council restored some of that funding. That represents the original budget in 2020. And in 2021, the 874,650 is the original budget. That shaded area that you see, or slightly less dark area, is about $157,000. that was approved in special ATB as a part of a restoration. So that gets you a little over $1 million in grants in 21. The proposed budget in 2022 is about flat to where we ended up in 21. I will add that we certainly recognize that that is a flat budget. It does not strive towards where we want to be in funding towards our community cultural plan. We have identified ARPA as a potential source of funding over the next few years to address the full funding of that plan. We do also recognize that it is one-time in nature, and so that necessitates a conversation about long-term funding. And what staff is proposing and working with our Arts Commission on is teeing up that conversation as a part of the revision, the renewal of the cultural plan in 2023, 24, in the coming years. And we do have Matt Shazansky, who can get into more details of the changes over the years and some of the plans as we've discussed them with ARPA and coming up to that renewal of our cultural plan. We're happy to take questions at this time or wait until after public comment. And I do have suggested motion language when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for being responsive to the information that council requested. That's excellent. And I see that Bob has his hand up. Bob.
Thanks, Mark. Can you put it back to slide 6, the last one right before the questions? Thank you, the other one. This is probably a question for Matt Jazansky, the head of our arts group. Matt, I see that the overall budget, the blue line, has about tripled since we adopted the cultural master plan in 2015, from 540,000 to almost 1.6 million in this proposed budget. And Mark mentioned that that there may be some backfill, temporary and not permanent backfill for ARPA or additional funds from ARPA, but Mark also observed that that's obviously not recurring. And it doesn't get us to our goal. What is our goal? What are we hoping to get to? I mean, when will we say, all right, we're at the level of funding that we're happy with?
Thank you. Matt Jazansky with the Office of Arts and Culture. And the Community Cultural Plan has a goal by this phase in the cultural plan's final phase to have a budget of over $2 million and a staff of 6 to handle all those programs. That's in 2015 dollars, however. And so, taking into account inflation, and especially with public art and the cost of construction that's raised, and also some programming that we didn't anticipate in 2015, especially in the past few years with the pandemic and the ongoing needs there, it's probably over that $2 million mark.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Super. Council, any other questions, Mary?
Yeah, I also have a question for Matt. What is the timing for the renewal of the Arts and Culture Master Plan?
So the current cultural plan expires in 2024. So we're hoping to have a new plan or renew this plan for January 1st, 2025.
And what are the kinds of things that you anticipate might be addressed in that renewal?
Well, I think a lot has changed since 2015, and especially around the affordability issues and support for artists as small business owners. Those issues were pointed out, but have been a growing concern over the years. And the approach to venues is another issue I think is going to change in that next cultural plan. The mix of venues, affordability for artists and organizations to rent them, and what new venues we should bring online.
Okay, thank you.
Mark.
Thanks for the presentation. I just have 2 questions. The first is that I seem to have misplaced $64 million. We have a $462 million budget, but if you go to page 8 of the memo, the line items appear to add up to $526 million. How do we reconcile this?
If you could give us a second, Mark, we're going to look up that information right now. Are you referring to the chart on the operating changes by department? Is that what you're looking?
No, I was looking at, I believe it's page 8 of the memorandum itself. And there was a list of all of the components of the city's budget. Perhaps could it be inclusive of funds that are not incorporated into the budget itself?
Hi, Mark, this is Cara. So you're looking at the actual ordinance and the appropriating amounts by fund, I believe. Is that correct?
I believe so. I don't have it in front of me.
So on that chart where Mark showed maybe you can pull it back up, Mark, but the $462 million, it says that it excludes internal services and transfers. And so that $462 million is sort of a true net number, but when we appropriate, we have to appropriate across all funds. So that $462 million number is sort of avoiding double counting, essentially.
Fair enough. I got it. And I noted on, I think it was page 6 of the staff memo, that even after we delete the $12.3 million for 30 Pearl, we actually have a decline in housing and human services expenditures from the period 2019 to 2022, which just seems a little odd to me in light of the expanded nature of their responsibilities and the conditions that we're experiencing in the city. Can anybody speak to that at all?
So I could quickly speak to it, but then I would invite people from Housing and Human Services to speak to it as well. You may recall last year during the budget process, we, in our second reading, or I think it actually might have gone to a third reading last year, had a slide sort of that addressed Housing and Human Services budget, and that is that that comparison that you're looking at from 2019 actual to 2022 budget, that 2019 actual captures budgeted monies that they budget a lot of their money off cycle through the ATB processes. Okay. And so what they always budget during the original budget in the fall is often significantly less than what their eventual budget is come May. And their actual spending does vary a lot. We incorporated the largest increase in spending, or the largest big spending in 2019 in the description in that table. But they also, just because their projects and such vary a lot year to year. And so then they reappropriate the remaining dollars. But I would invite Housing and Human Services if they want to add anything to that.
Before we do that, is there any other department that has that kind of variability in expenditures? Where
I think a lot of our capital departments do transportation, but a lot of the transportation dollars are capital, and the capital automatically rolls to the next year. So I think Housing and Human Services may be one of the departments that has the most operating budget that they then carry over and reappropriate through the first ATB.
Hey, Kurt, I see that you're there. Would you like to address Mark's question?
Yeah, actually, Cara did an excellent job explaining that. The only thing I'll add is that so our commercial impact fees and our cash and lieu payments typically come mid-year. Usually in July is when we get about 80% of those funds, at least for cash and lieu. And so it's hard to anticipate the income that we'll receive in any particular year until we get it actually into the year. And, cash and lieu can range anywhere from $3 million a year to 12 or 13 million a year. So it's, we go into the budgeting process in a fairly conservative approach and then make changes to the ATB as necessary.
Thank you, Kurt. That's all I've got.
All right, thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Mark. Any other questions, council, before we go to the public hearing? Great. I am seeing none, so we can turn now to the public hearing. For this item, we have 7 members of the public signed up, so everyone will get 3 minutes. The first 3 speakers that we have tonight are Lynn Siegel, Nicole Spear, and Brian Marin. Lynn, you are up and you have 3 minutes to speak about our budget.
First, the 464 million, or approximately that, the utility bonding being high this year because of we needed to do that activity that year, could be a lot lower if we municipalize. So I highly recommend we municipalize in 2025 or as soon as we possibly can, and bring some of that money back into our own community. The substance abuse, the 8 million, that's happening a lot because we can't seem to manage our affordable housing very well in Boulder. And we've got a lot of people in despair. And when they're in despair, they go into substance abuse. And then when they go into substance abuse, Michael Bosma makes a pile of money out of it when he's got 2 projects going on, 311 Mapleton, which nets him $10,000 to $50,000 a month per person for 93 people or something like that. And those are seniors that money could go to their kids. Their kids aren't getting the money, so their kids are probably the ones in despair that Michael can take care of at September School, which he plans to put a 54-person facility for drug rehabilitation with all of 4, count them, 4 people supervising the place at $9,000 a month. So the money that we're spending is in the wrong places. We should be not building so much that we're driving the wealth inequality and therefore substance abuse. The other thing, water, the capital improvements in water is really stressful when we're growing as much as we are, when we're growing alpine balsam on a basis of transit-oriented development, which is not happening anymore since the virus. And we need to just stop all this building, because it's not, Boulder might be a desirable place and we're already going to have financial issues with housing here, but let's not make it worse. So I advise you to fundamentally restructure your budget to cause the demand for the budget to be a lot less. And then we can give it to the arts, where it should be going. I don't see the timer anywhere.
It's right up on the screen. You got 20 seconds left.
I don't have it on my screen.
Well, I'm sorry about that, but you have 15 seconds left.
Yeah, well, you need to improve your system there because I have no vision of 20 seconds or anything. So, and I really like to know, to be able to.
Thank you, Lynn. Your time is up. Appreciate your input. With that, we'll move on to Nicole Spear, Brian Marin, and Ryan Bunnick. Nicole.
Thank you all. First, I wanted to say thank you to you all and to the city staff for seeing our city and our budget through last year's financial crisis. That our budget has recovered as much as it has, and we're entering 2022 on such solid financial footing is really incredible. So thank you for giving the next council and our entire city a leg up next year. Budgets are my favorite organizational documents because you can tell so much about what an organization values by looking at how it spends its money. Organizations and people can say they value all kinds of things, but action requires time and money. This is why so many people who work on racial and social justice issues refer to budgets as moral documents. They show our priorities and values and the way we care for each other and the people in our community. As you know, I'm currently running for one of the open seats on City Council. And as you also know from your own City Council campaigns, this means I've spent a lot of time over the past year talking with people in many different parts of our community, trying to understand their concerns and their hopes and dreams for themselves and for our city. When I look at our 2022 budget, I don't see the priorities and values I've heard reflected. And I wonder whether this means budgeting is a process our city needs to improve upon, or whether our priorities and values are different from what we say they are. Over the past year, I've heard so many stories from people of color, LGBTQ folks, people living with disabilities, and low-income people who've lived here for decades and have heard our city talk again and again about becoming equitable and inclusive without seeing any measurable changes in the way they're treated. I've heard from workers and retirees at all income levels who've been pushed out of Boulder by increasing housing prices, despite our talk about increasing affordable housing and housing our workforce. So many people I've heard from are concerned about rising homelessness and encampments, but they see us investing more and more money into law enforcement solutions to social services problems. And every time I talk with our youngest residents, many of whom can't even vote yet, they're begging us to address the climate emergency that's threatening all of us, but that will affect them most of all. When I look at our 2022 budget, I don't see social justice, housing, homelessness, and climate represented to the degree people in our community say they want us to focus on these issues. I also don't see the vision and core values of the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan reflected in our budget. If someone knew nothing about our city except the numbers in our budget, they might mistake us for valuing land and property more than we value inclusion, sustainability, and resilience. I don't think that's true. It's too late to make big changes for this next year, but for those of you who will be staying on for the next council, and for those of us who may be joining you next month, I want to challenge us to think about what a budget would look like that accurately reflects our Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan vision. Again, I want to thank you all for getting our budget in order and keeping our city and our economy going over the past 18 months. I hope the next council will use the head start you've given us to craft future budgets in a way that reflects the priorities and values we say we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Next up, we have Brian Marin, Ryan Bonick, and Carrie Palazzari. Brian, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Council, Mayor Weaver, City Manager. My name is Brian Marin, and tonight I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Boulder Association of Firefighters to let Council and the members of the community know of a budgetary decision that will have negative impacts on the services we're able to provide the community. The proposed budget for next year includes a $30,000 cut to the fire department budget that's specifically earmarked for the funding of the water rescue team. The $30,000 cut is the entire budget of the water rescue team. For over 40 years, the City of Boulder Fire Department has had a team of specially trained individuals capable of rescuing victims from moving water, like Boulder Creek in the floodwaters of 2013, and also open water, like Boulder Reservoir and the countless other lakes and ponds spread throughout Boulder. On average, each year, the team is dispatched around 30 calls for service in the Boulder community. Not all of the calls turn into rescues, but some of them do. We have saved stranded kids and tubers off the rocks of Boulder Creek, and we have pulled victims out of the waters of Boulder Reservoir and other areas. As it stands right now, we will no longer be providing these services as of January 1st, 2022, despite having properly trained and equipped personnel. Our chief has asked the executive budget team 3 times to restore the funding without success. Although he has told us that if swiftwater rescue is a risk for the community, we will find money to support it. There is no money dedicated to maintaining the training levels and equipment needed to be successful. And if we are able to support swiftwater rescue, the funds that have been budgeted for other reasons, we will certainly not be able to support subsurface rescue and recovery of victims in the community. The news that our department will be lowering our service level to the community of Boulder at the start of the new year has been devastating to the morale of our members. The firefighters of the City of Boulder pride ourselves on being highly trained and well-equipped in order to handle any type of emergency call that we receive. History has shown that a small percentage of the nearly 15,000 calls we receive annually will be for a water rescue. These rescues, whether swiftwater or subsurface, take an additional level of training and preparation that many of our members have worked hard to attain. It would be a disservice to the community to have these valuable resources that are ready and willing to help in the case of emergency forced to sit and watch when the next opportunity comes. The mission statement of the fire department is we exist to protect lives and property from harm through effective risk reduction, emergency response, and recovery assistance. The water rescue team is an integral part of providing emergency response and recovery in the community. If the funding is not restored, which is less than 0.07% of the entire budget for the City of Boulder next year, our members will be forced to sit and watch along with all the other family members and bystanders the next time someone falls through the ice and does not resurface, or sit and watch when a boat sinks at the reservoir, or when a triathlete has a heart attack and goes underwater. Despite having the appropriate training, equipment, and willing personnel, we will be the ones to have to tell the parent that we will not go in the water to save their child. So on behalf of the Boulder Association of Firefighters, we would appreciate if council will reconsider the $30,000 to the water rescue team and allow us to continue to provide the highest level of service to the members of Boulder community.
Thank you, Brian. Next up, we have Ryan Bonick, Carrie Palazzari, and Kathleen McCormick. Ryan, you have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. Hi, council and staff. Thank you for your time. I'll try to keep this super short. Just want to start by commenting, it's kind of weird that the budget for a new council elected in just 2 weeks is decided prior to them even taking office. Why does the outgoing council decide how the city's money is spent? I think it makes a lot more sense to shift that around somehow so the new council can decide on the budget. Plenty of companies' fiscal years don't follow calendar years. I don't know why Boulder's needs to. As for the budget itself, Police Chief Harold came before you all and asked for $2.7 million from COVID funding. I'd prefer that money, and at minimum, the additional money increases being provided to the police in the 2022 budget instead be relocated to a nonviolent program like Denver's STAR program. Second, climate change has already changed our world, but there's a lot worse things to come in future years and decades. Meanwhile, we're giving free parking out like candy to single occupancy cars, including nights and weekends downtown. Let's stop subsidizing single occupancy vehicles and start investing more in a climate aware and eco-focused future like Boulder claims to value by instead funding things like public transit and bike infrastructure. The pandemic has led to skyrocketing sales of e-bikes, up 240% this past year alone. Let's support those people instead of supporting cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Next, we have Carrie Palazzari, Kathleen McCormick, and Deborah Malden. Carrie, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. I'm Carrie Palazzari, Executive Director of Studio Arts Boulder, and I also sat on the grant review panel for the Boulder Arts Commission this year. Before I comment on the arts and culture budget, I wanted to just point out and lift up a noticeable shift in tone. Pre-COVID, the 2020 budget was proposed with a conservative fiscal approach, focusing on essential services and a strictly balanced budget with no new expenses. And I just want to pause and commend the current city staff and the city manager's office for this shift in tone that seeks to balance cautious optimism with fiscal stewardship, with a focus on human-centered priorities. Services that have, quote, the highest impact on those who live, work, and visit Boulder, and an investment in city staff that's designed to support important community gathering places and beloved services. This language is a marked shift in recognizing the role of local government as being for and about community and investing the city budget accordingly. Back in the fall of 2019, there was a last-minute budget adjustment to close the gap of inadequate government funding to the city's largest cultural destinations, which resulted in a one-time facilities grant for arts and culture institutions. Then last year, in the fall of 2020, Council restored a chunk of the arts and culture budget, and I spoke to you in February to express our sincere gratitude for that. And yet, here we are again at the last minute, asking for arts and culture to again have more support. I'm sensing a trend. In every list of priorities for the budget, arts and culture is included in the top, but it is such a tiny fraction of the actual money invested by the budget, just 1/3 of 1%. We are grateful that the 2022 budget restores funding to pre-COVID levels, but that's not the measure of where we should be. As you heard, the 2015 cultural plan, or what the community has asked for, by a quick inflation calculation while y'all were talking, we should be 2.3 million in the 2022 budget, or another 800,000 or so. I know staffing shortages hurt across city departments, but the Office of Arts and Culture is working their tail off to meet the cultural plan goals with just over half a staff. They're 2.25 FTE short. So when many other departments have 2022 budget funding, not only for restoration, but also for enhanced services, please don't leave arts and culture behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Next, we have Kathleen McCormick, and we will close with Deborah Malden. Kathleen, you have 3 minutes.
There we go.
Good evening, council and staff members, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Kathleen McCormick, and I currently chair the Boulder Arts Commission. I'm very grateful for your hard work on the city budget and for planning to restore funding to pre-COVID levels for grants for arts and culture organizations. Boulder's arts and culture sector was disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and recovery is lagging other sectors, including the nonprofit sector as a whole. And this funding increase brings hope and resources. With a budget increase of 8%, however, the Arts and Culture Division's budget increase is small relative to an overall budget increase of 32%. The current $1.6 million proposed for arts and culture represents only 1/3 of 1% of the city budget, despite the many millions of dollars that arts and culture contribute to the Boulder economy directly and indirectly by generating jobs and tax revenues and attracting visitors to the city. We have a lot of catch-up work to do to meet our commitments to the city's cultural plan. The current budget proposal is $1 million below funding recommended by the Community Cultural Plan, and the Office of Arts and Culture staff is short over 2 positions. The Public Art Program has no ongoing consistent funding. Current funding is cobbled together from different sources that vary widely from year to year. Please consider spending more now and increasing city investments over the next several years to establish a more sustainable and supportive environment for arts and culture. We need to prioritize arts and culture for general fund allocations, tax funds, and ARPA funds in 2022 and beyond to make strategic investments in assets, including artists and arts organizations that benefit the community. Some of these investments that need funding right now are: 1, the Creative Neighborhoods Program to enhance social infrastructure, neighborhood vitality, and city programming to meet equity and climate change goals. 2, more general operating support funding for arts organizations. 3, consistent public art funding to allow for maintenance and longer range planning. 4, rental assistance funds for work and performance spaces to help address acute affordability challenges. And 5, support for artists program, which provides a range of services, sponsorships, and fellowships for professional and emerging artists. Arts and culture have helped to heal, strengthen, and diversify the fabric of our community, which has faced immense challenges since 2020. Creativity is an engine of Boulder's economy and competitive edge. Please invest in arts and culture now and continue to increase funding from the general fund, dedicated tax funds, and ARPA to enhance and sustain our critical social infrastructure and creative economy. I look forward to working with you as you determine how arts and culture funding will be increased. Thank you again.
Thank you, Kathleen. And finally, we have Deborah Malden. Deborah, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Create Boulder to request $500,000 of additional funding for the Office of Arts and Culture. This represents 0.1% of the proposed 2022 budget and is in addition to anticipated ARPA funding. Combined, these additional investments are essential for the city to implement the Community Cultural Plan. City Council enthusiastically adopted the Cultural Plan in 2015, following robust citywide input, including surveys that showed strikingly high cultural participation among Boulder residents. 80% of respondents reported taking advantage of Boulder's theaters and concert venues. 74% pursue art as a hobby. A modest incremental investment now would have an outsized impact on the arts sector, which, as you know, was disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and whose recovery is continuing to lag. This should concern council, as the city's arts organizations and artists are key allies in advancing the city's diversity, equity, and inclusivity goals, and are vital to the city's economic and social recovery. Incremental spending on arts and culture would support a range of strategies and staffing needs identified in the cultural plan, details of which we shared with you in our email last Friday. We also shared suggestions for funding this additional $500,000 and achieving stable long-term arts funding. For 2022, the city could pay back the reserve fund slightly slower, as now is the time to invest in Boulder's recovery. Every dollar invested in the arts strengthens the social fabric of our community and ripples through the economy in the form of jobs and spending at local retailers, restaurants, and hotels. This generates local taxes, a positive financial return on the city's investment. Create Boulder respectfully requests that council approve this proposed $500,000 adjustment to the 2022 budget. We thank you for your consideration and your hard work on behalf of the Boulder community.
Thank you, Deborah. And with that, we will bring the public hearing to a close and bring this back to council. Council, any final questions, discussion, or motion on the budget? Rachel.
I had one question. We heard that the fire department is cutting water rescue team, I think it was called. So I was just wondering if Chief Calderazzo might speak to that. Like, will there be someone available to go in for water rescues? I guess is my essential question.
So the short answer, Rachel, is we will respond to water rescues. What's being essentially cut from the budget is the overtime allocation that we use to train our subsurface dive technicians. So that is the subsurface response, the divers. What we've gone on to do because of this cut is have conversations about what is the highest water rescue related risk. And what Brian threw in there, I think is important for us all to think about in terms of levels of risk. So water rescue is actually a bunch of different types of risk. So there's swift water, there's the creek. That's a different kind, it requires a different kind of responder. Then there's subsurface, where it would be in a deeper pool of water, such as the Res or some other big body of water that might require a diver. What we've had traditionally is we've had a dive response team. And when we do training, that $30,000 we use is to allocate to their training. And with that cut, we're essentially cutting our own ability to respond with divers. That doesn't mean that divers won't respond. We've also used, we have a contract with Boulder Emergency Squad, but they have traditionally used our services as well. In other words, they use our divers and they supplement our divers. If we cut this, then it's just using BES, the Volunteer Emergency Squad, and their divers to do dives. We would still be going, we go to all hazards, but we would not be the ones in this case actually getting in the water with dive technicians. That's what he was specifically referring to. Swift water is a completely different animal, and that's one we've been trying to focus more squarely on for the long term, having conversations around, okay, if we have funding going forward, we ask for funding going forward, where should the water rescue program be allocating that money? And that's a different conversation. So I just want to, in strictly answering your question, we would still be going, you'd still have responders there, but we would not be going into the water as divers. We would be looking for BES to perform that function.
So am I understanding you to say that sort of we have it covered regionally, and that maybe like with the swift water, are we going to adopt more of that, and then other entities will do more of the diving, but somebody will still be there to dive?
Yeah, so the only dive program in the county will be the Boulder Emergency Squads. That's who the sheriff uses. And traditionally they have also relied on us to help them with regional response. But I've talked with a lot of the regional responders. We're the only fully staffed 24/7 dive program that is career, that is with responders. BES is a volunteer emergency squad, same qualifications, same everything. And through a contract, they do that already for the sheriff. They would do the same for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Mary.
Yeah, I just wanted to colloquy on that. How many swift water rescues do we have on an annual basis as compared to subsurface dive type rescues?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, and I can get those to you. I can tell you proportionately, there are more swift water related rescues than there are subsurface. And you know, one of the things that you do when you look at risk is, okay, well, how, in terms of equity, how many people will be affected by this particular risk in the community? And then we basically turn them into different levels, no, low, moderate, and high. And it's a frequency versus consequence kind of thing, where if it happens a lot, even though it's just one or two people, well, that's a big thing for the whole community. If it's happened infrequently, but it could affect a lot of people, that's a big risk as well. It's something we should be planning on addressing in some response fashion. Hence why we put together what we call a standard of cover. And next March or April, somewhere in there, we hope to come back to you, not just on a presentation on our master plan, but to tell you how we're doing in terms of meeting those different levels of risk. Swift water, in our estimation, is a higher level of risk. But truthfully, we have not, I believe we can do a lot better as a program and as a team to address that. Here's the rub though. We stood up a dive team years and years ago, and we've been funding it. And so now it's really just the incremental cost of maintaining the team, to be perfectly honest. So obviously if we stand down the team and we try to stand it up again in the future saying, okay, we've addressed swift water, let's move on to the other water rescue related risks like subsurface, because we think we're at a point where we need to address that, it will cost us a lot more to do that. So some of the arguments made by my own team legitimately suggest that, hey, it's just an incremental cost. Why don't you just keep running it? However, if I were standing up a water rescue program today from scratch and addressing Boulder's risk, the bigger one is definitely swift water, and then to a lesser degree, subsurface, and even what we would ice rescue. And those two kind of go hand in hand often. Ice rescue can often turn into a subsurface issue for us. So those are the big three when we talk about water rescue. But I would say that if we were to put numbers to it, proportionately, swift water is the bigger community risk compared to the other two. The other two, especially subsurface, if we want to use events like triathlons and all the other things that happen in Boulder, well, those are event driven. They're very, very specific to certain folks. And we have to be careful with how we use our resources to address those things if they're not being, paid for at large or by those users of that service. So that's some of the conversations we've had internally about this, but I just want to put it out there so everyone understands that there are different levels of risk even in the water rescue domain, if you will.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Aaron and then Mark. Aaron?
Another follow up on this. So Chief, I appreciate all the information. Sounds like there will be other coverage for these issues, but do you feel comfortable with this cut? Like, do you feel like we still are meeting the kind of safety needs of the community with this budget cut?
If I had a wonderful allotment of money, like I said, I would probably spend that money more on the swift water piece of things first before I got to the dive piece of the program. In truth, we're moving to what we would say is a volunteer service for the dives program. That means that we'll have to wait for them to get on the scene. Sometimes it'll be fast, sometimes maybe not so much. But swift water is something that we'd want to distribute more generally because of all the creeks and all the opportunities out there. We probably have not got that funded as well as we should, but we need to have more conversations and bring those forward. So I think what I would need to know is, yes, we want a dive program, and then we would fund that. But then honestly, we would have to come back and say, yes, but the swift water piece is something we're going to make a case for going forward. And here's the numbers, and here's what we think we need to do. So I think even if we restored funding and said, we really want to keep our dive program, especially since we've been doing it so long, I would still want to come back and say the bigger risk though is swift water. We probably need to talk about what that looks like. And that would be for next year, probably.
Okay, thank you.
Mark and then Mirabai. Mark.
This question is actually for Kara or Mark. Can somebody tell me what the line item or with Chief Calderazzo, what's the line item for the fire department? How much money are we spending on the fire department in this budget?
Just one second, pull that up.
I'll let them answer, but it's 22 million plus, I'm sure. That was my recollection, but I didn't want to be presumptuous about it. 22 million. On a percentage basis, this looks like a very tiny proportion of the fire department budget. And so my question, Kara, is within a department, what is the discretion of a department head, if any, to move some funds around to deal with an emerging need?
So I will just correct that the proposed 2022 recommended budget is actually 23.4 million. So just put that out there. But I
mean, this is a fraction of 1% of the budget. So my question is, to what extent can a department head, as Chief Calderazzo is, reallocate money within that $23.4 million to cover a need that he deems to be critical if it's not being specifically funded?
From a pure accounting and budgetary perspective, they have flexibility, but I might even let Nuria speak to that. But there is flexibility to move dollars around. And I think what Chief Calderazzo spoke to is that this is an overtime cost. And I know that they're challenged with their overtime budget across all the overtime budget needs. So I would just sort of share that and offer input from anybody else.
My question is based on the fact that this is such a small percentage of the overall budget. I'm really asking, is there administrative discretion to deal with this internally within the department if that's the desire of the department?
So I'll chime in and say this, that when we're doing budgeting and allocating dollars, right, we don't have infinite dollars as we move forward, and some hard decisions have to be made. Certainly, we don't want departments coming as they do when they present their budget request to us in the summer and say, this is what I want it for, and then turn around and use it for other things. But I think your question, Mark, is slightly different. I think your question is within the pocket of money that you have generally, if you happen to have either it's vacancy savings or a program didn't go through and you had extra dollars for other things, what is your discretion to do internally? And I will say that I welcome department heads to think through that. Some certainly move and think this is a better during the middle of the course of the financial year, say this is a better spend and can we have that? And so we certainly have conversations about it. But we do have some controls because we don't want monies allocated for X purpose to be spent on Y thing, right? So I think this is one where, and certainly we've had long conversations with the chief, and I appreciate what a difficult position he is in tonight as he's answering these questions about it. Because on the one hand, we certainly have a balancing of needs as you look at data, and this is something that we'll continue to work with the fire department with on a variety of issues. But as you look at data on overtime or on just programming in general, what is the best, highest use of your time and your effort? Because everything has consequences. And I actually really appreciate the fact that the chief is looking at his programs and saying, I perhaps have a bigger, highest use and or a bigger problem that I need to attend to that really focuses my attention there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Mirabai.
Thanks, Sam. So just out of curiosity, because I didn't realize this was happening. Is this too late for us to fix this now? I mean, I know we're kind of voting on this or moving forward with this, but other than what's in the budget, is there a way to fix this? I mean, to me, this just is kind of ludicrous. I mean, this is health and safety of our community. And so for this to be cut, I mean, BES is great, and I've worked with them before with being in a county fire department. But again, yes, it takes them time to get there, and not having that service as a city is, especially when it's kind of a smaller fund, it's not this huge ask. And it sounds like we have some pretty critical cases every year. How do we, I mean, if we decide to change this tonight, can we do that?
Nuria, I think, or Mark or Nuria, I think that's to one of you about what our latitude is here.
Yeah, I think it's a simple answer, Mayor, is if you make a substantive change to the budget, we do have to go to third reading. So if it were an increase, it would change our appropriating numbers and we would have to make those adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And I think I'll just weigh in here with the perspective. I consider this to be very much a department head's kind of prioritization decision. It's hard for me to second guess what the best use of that $30,000 is. I would lean on the actual department head to make that decision, because you could take that 30,000 and you could put it towards ALS, you could put it towards more swiftwater rescue, or whatever. I think this, to me, is a decision we've heard it flagged, and Chief, I would just ask you, if we proceed with things as they are, do you feel like you've got sufficient budget to meet your mission next year? And I'm a little hesitant to micromanage, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on, if we let this go forward, will you have the budget you need to meet your mission?
The simple answer is yes, I do believe I will. The challenge that we have with the 30,000 is it seems like it's not a lot, but as Kara alluded, we blow our budget in overtime every year for contractual obligations, for leave purposes, for long-term injury on and off the job. And we're still trying to work with finance and HR to find that sweet spot for the right number of firefighters to keep trucks on the road just for all of our services, versus just paying overtime, which of course is always cheaper but hurts your workforce. So that's why, and thanks, Kara, for reminding us that it's 23 and a half, because I remember now that big part of that is the additional 3 firefighters, so that we can address some of these overtime related issues. And so you can almost count on us going over on our overtime budget, partly because I struggle at times to get folks in seats because of whatever leave or other contractual obligations. So that's of course the highest and best need for us. And we're beginning to really, really address that, I think, in the right way and the constructive way. For some of these more specialized operations programs, I'm hesitant to give numbers and say this or that, because we still need to have robust conversations internally about where the risk is, where we need to spend dollars, and how we make the case to the executive budget team going forward, so that it's a reasonable ask, and it's not one that is a lot of money chasing after very, very small risk, which I don't want us to be doing. Having said all of that, this is a diet program that's been set up for years. It does serve a function in the community, has been used in various different ways. I don't believe that if we were standing up a water rescue program from scratch today, we would start with a dive rescue program, but it does represent a lot of already sunk costs and a lot of training and a lot of dedicated folks. And so we will, in essence, if we stand it down, have a different model. I just want us to understand there's a different model going forward. We will be using a volunteer emergency squad, but it's not unlike what we do in the backdrop for hikers who are stranded. We use Rocky Mountain Rescue to pull people off the mountain there. The sheriff uses them to do that, and they bring them to us down at the bottom of the trail, and then we transport them. So it's a similar model. It's just a different one. And honestly, if you'd ask me, is this a better or worse model? Well, in terms of the single event, it's a different model. It's a slower model because we're relying on volunteers. We will have a first due unit on the scene very quickly with some capabilities, but they will not be making entry in the water the way we do now. Even the first unit now doesn't make entry in the water. They if they're not a dive team, they will get to the water, they will give us a size up, they will get the dive team out, and then the dive team makes the entry. So that's kind of how it works today. It'll be different under the new model, same team response, but now we're calling on a volunteer group to come bring their divers out to effect whatever rescue or recovery we need to do.
Great. And I guess leaving those details aside, thanks for sharing that. This is roughly 0.1% of your budget. And it seems to me like, we as council should be careful about messing around with things that are 0.1% of a department's budget, because I think that is only for the experts to do. So it seems to me like that if you all as a team, you and the executive team made a decision that you wanted to reallocate 0.1% of your budget, that wouldn't be something that would typically rise to the level of us to weigh in on. So I'll just leave it at that and turn. I see, Bob, you got your hand up as well.
Well, two things. First, I want to agree with Sam that we're approving a comprehensive $400 million plus budget. And I don't want to micromanage any department, whether it's the fire department or any department. This budget is a product of thousands of hours of work by the budget team, by the department heads, and you all negotiated with each other and have come up with this comprehensive budget. And if we start moving things around here or there, it's zero sum. So we take dollars away from, give somebody dollars, we have to take dollars away from somebody else. And so I think far be it from us to come in with just a few minutes of review and upset all of the work that's been done over the last, 6 or 7 months to pull this budget together. I would also say that if the chief comes back, in a few months and says, hey, listen, I could really use that $30,000, I'm finding that this is not meeting my need. We do 4 or 5 adjustments to base during the course of a year. And so, it seems to me that what we should do is we should approve the budget that the city manager and her team have put in front of us. And then if department heads, if it turns out we were too conservative in our estimates and we've got a little money left over, in a few months, they can come back with an adjustment to base and we can make whatever adjustments that the city manager and her department heads recommend. So this is, while we approve our budget once a year, we really approve our budget several times a year because we are constantly making adjustments. So I don't want to second guess Nuria and her team.
Great, thank you, Bob. And with that, I would ask, are there any more questions, any further discussion or a motion? Aaron.
Yeah, just thanks for that, Bob, and Sam, for your comments about micromanaging. I thought that was very well said. I just wanted to also respond to the folks who testified about arts funding and who sent us a number of emails over the last week or so. I really appreciate your advocacy as a strong proponent of arts and arts funding myself. I appreciate how you're always out there advocating for arts and those programs and those fundings. I will say I do feel that this is a restoration budget, that our primary purpose this year is to bring our funding back and our services back as close to what they were pre-pandemic as possible. And so there have been some tough decisions made, and as we've strove to do that as much as possible or as closely as possible. And I do really appreciate that the arts budget was brought back to its pre-pandemic level. I think that was a really good call on the part of the budgeters. So I wouldn't look to increase it past that level today in this budget, but I do really look forward in the coming years as our revenues continue to return and increase to look for other opportunities for additional arts funding, whether it be through the ARPA program or other general funds as those funding streams come back. So appreciate again all of your advocacy.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, I believe a motion would be a good thing right now.
I mean, I've got the floor at the moment.
Go for it.
So I will go ahead and, we've got so many of them. I'll go ahead and move that we adopt ordinances 8505, 8506, 8507, and 8508, implementing all kinds of details for next year's budget.
Second on that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Aaron, would you like to speak to your motion?
Well, as I said last time, just staff, finance staff in particular, but all of the departments, all the department heads, everyone involved an enormous amount of work went into this. It was very thoughtfully done, very carefully done. And we are restoring so many services that we lost during the pandemic. Not all of them, but many of them. And I look forward to getting back to 100% to where we were before too long, but extremely well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Mark?
I think the description of this budget as a restoration budget is quite apt. I'm very pleased that we've been able to restore as much as we have. And I am very impressed with the work done by finance staff and staff generally in preparing a document that encompasses $462 million of spending. So I think it is well considered, well thought out, and I'm happy to second the motion.
Excellent. And I will jump in here and say I agree with both Aaron and Mark about this. It is a restoration budget, and I think we should all be pleased that we have gotten to where we have with restoring kind of all the components that we care most about in our budget. I would also say that I agree that we should look forward to using the adjustments. I expect this coming year, I won't be part of making those adjustments, but it will be an opportunity more than most years, I think, to track how we're doing and watch closely where we could plus up things if we have extra or where we'll have to cut as we go forward. I will also point out that a big chunk of this budget, we hear these large numbers, a big chunk of those numbers in our budget are utilities. So water, wastewater, and stormwater are a huge component of the funding we have. And then there's also a bunch of dedicated funding that goes to things like transportation, open space, and parks, which we as council don't have much discretion over. So if you look at the part that we have discretion over, more in the ballpark of $140, $150 million, you will see within that, if we think about the arts as a fraction of that, it is a better percentage. I think we always strive to go for 1% or a little more for the arts, and we're approaching that, even if we're not quite there yet. And I know that we're not at the full level of our cultural plan vision. Hopefully we'll be able to get there, and hopefully we'll come in with more budget, more revenue this year because of a recovering economy, and can look at what to do with that extra money. But I think that this is quite a good budget considering the hole that we've come out of in the last year, and appreciate staff's hard work getting us here. Mary.
Thanks, Sam. I wanted to agree with the whole approach of not wanting to micromanage and how much time staff has actually put into developing this budget. I wanted to comment also on the arts and dedicating more funding to that. I would, of course, I won't be here to do that, but as you move forward, I would ask that council, the remaining council members, consider the fact that when the 2015 cultural plan was developed, we did not have yet in place, or were we even talking about, very loudly anyway, about a racial equity plan. That has become a big part of what we are trying to weave into every decision that we make throughout the city, and the arts included, so that if there is a big increase in the arts budget, I think that along with that, there should be some measure of how it's going to be spent in an equitable manner. I don't think that's there yet. And I hope that when the new plan is developed, that is part of the conversation, how that is going to get woven into how it gets spent, and to make sure that those dollars are spent in like those $30,000 in overtime is the highest and best use. So that's all I have to say about that. And I think it's a great budget. It is a recovery budget, and I hope that we continue to increase the stability of our city in this manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. All right. Any other comments? All right. We have a motion and a second. I think we're ready for a vote. Alicia, I believe this is roll call, correct? And you are on mute still. There you go. Perfect.
That is correct, sir. Let me get all my stuff together here.
Sure.
Councilmember Nagel.
Aye.
Sweatlick,
Yes.
Wallach,
Aye.
Weaver,
Aye.
Yates,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Brockett,
Aye.
Friend.
Yes.
Sir, ordinances 8505 through 8508 were approved 8-1 and adopted. 8-0, my apologies, and adopted.
Thank you very much. And if you will take us on to our last item, public hearing.
Yes, sir, that would be item 5D on our agenda tonight. That is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt ordinance 8512, granting authority to the approving authority under Title IX Land Use Code BRC 1981 to approve a development that exceeds the minimum open space per dwelling unit standards for a property in the Business Community 1 District, BC1, located at 3320 28th Street at Diagonal Plaza, authorizing the city manager to execute documents that will secure affordable housing on the property and setting forth related details.
Excellent. Thank you. And Nuria.
Yep, we will I see Elaine there in the wings, but we're going to let Jacob sort of frame it up for us.
Thank you, Nuria, and good evening, Mayor Weaver and members of council. Before you tonight is an ordinance related to the redevelopment of the site known as Diagonal Plaza. And in summary, the city's existing ordinance requires more open space per dwelling than proposed in the current concept plan for this site. Now, at the July 13th concept plan review discussion, you all supported the idea of an ordinance solution to this problem based on the fact that the project would further City Council's revitalization and sustainability goals for the site. So what's before you is this ordinance change that allows the discussion of this concept to continue through the site review process. And as a result, should you approve this ordinance tonight, this project would still be subject to significant community conversation through that site review process. Ultimately, Planning Board and City Council will have another opportunity to review the project at that time. So with that said, this ordinance was unanimously recommended for your approval by the Planning Board. And with that, I will turn it over to Elaine McLaughlin, Senior Planner, to present this ordinance.
Great, thanks. Appreciate that, Jacob, and good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm just gonna boot up the screen here, so bear with me while I get that going. So just as a roadmap of where we're headed this evening, I think it's probably instructive to understand that it's essentially a staff presentation this evening, and you can ask questions of staff or the applicant team, and then we'll have public comment. In the staff presentation, we are going to recap the process of where this has been, and then a little bit about the planning and build context that we talked about in July. And a light touch on the summary of the concept plan, because we spent quite a bit of time discussing that at concept plan review. And then the intent and need for ordinance 8512, along with policy direction that supports that ordinance. And so in terms of the process to date, as you may recall, this ordinance is an outgrowth of concept plan review input, as Jacob mentioned, both by Planning Board and by City Council's review of the concept plan. And at that time, Council gave input and, as Jacob noted, provided guidance on an ordinance as the most effective mechanism to support redevelopment with residential. And then earlier this month, it's important to note that Council approved the first reading of this ordinance that was on consent on October 5th, and then that was followed by Planning Board on October 7th, who voted unanimously to recommend Council approve the ordinance. And it's also important to note that Planning Board also recommended that Council consider a work plan item for next year for an area plan on the rest of Diagonal Plaza to keep this momentum going. If the ordinance is approved this evening, subsequent site use review application will be considered by Planning Board. And then, of course, City Council will have a call-up opportunity. So a brief recap of the important planning context that we've discussed at concept plan review several months ago. You'll recall that under the comprehensive plan, the Diagonal Plaza is recognized as a neighborhood center, as you can see there, with a mix of uses and range of services, and that the comp plan considers centers as places for having potential for infill and redevelopment specifically. So it's also important to note, as was discussed, that the site's surrounded by multi-use paths and bike lanes and routes connected to the greater Boulder area. And we think that this map is very instructive because it illustrates the 300 miles of bikeways, bike lanes, routes, and multi-use paths throughout the greater Boulder area. And then the site's pedestrian context is further identified as being in an area with better access to goods and services within walking distance through the Transportation Master Plan, or rather TMP's neighborhood access tool. In the concept plan discussion, we also talked about the site context that includes bus and bike support amenities. There's an RTD super stop right outside the door, bike storage lockers, public bike storage lockers, as well as bike and car share facilities. And we also discussed the zoning context and the fact that the Business Community 1, BC1 site zoning has a relatively suburban density, and it has a high open space per dwelling unit requirement of 1,200 square feet. And this is despite the fact that it's in this transit-rich context that's evolved over time, where the number of units on the site would necessitate almost 2/3 of the site to be open space. And so as we talked about in the concept plan, it was noted that this would essentially be an inefficient use of this infill catalyst site. And then contextually, it's important to note the North 28th Street Transportation Network Plan that we talked about that illustrates connections to and through the site, and that the plans will address this in the site review process. The applicants propose some consistent linkages with this plan. And then it's also important to recollect that the site consists of large surface parking lots we're all familiar with. There's a Walgreens on the north end and a vacant Sports Authority on the south end. And then we noted the potential to connect redevelopment to the Boulder Housing Partner Diagonal Court Apartments that's to the south. And it's important to note that that site is fully developed with 30 apartments and therefore is not part of Ordinance 8512 that's under consideration. So as was noted, the site's owned separately from other multiple property owners for the retail buildings that comprise Diagonal Plaza Shopping Center. And that was first developed in the 1960s. And then finally, to recap, it was discussed that the inability to redevelop the underutilized and essentially deteriorated Diagonal Plaza has been a challenge for past city councils that have weighed in on it. And even in 2011, 10 years ago now, City Council requested a study by the Urban Land Institute, a technical advisory panel, to come up with some recommendations on an approach. And the recommended approach in this case by TAB was an incremental approach to redevelopment to partner with Boulder Housing Partners as is proposed by the applicant team. So just a brief overview of the plan that council discussed in July. The applicant's planning new connections through the site, as we noted, new community park, a variety of residential units totaling approximately 284 units that'll include a range of sizes from essentially efficiency living units, about 475 square feet, through 3-bedroom units, along with townhome style units and permanently affordable units in the plan. There's ground floor commercial uses, wrapped parking, and then upper decks for open space. So specific to the ordinance we're discussing this evening, 8512, as noted in your packet, the city has considered similar ordinances from time to time to modify specific city standards when there's a circumstance that necessitates an exception, or to allow an exception where public benefit would arise and which would address specific policies in the Boulder Valley Comp Plan. And as was discussed by council, there is interest and support for revitalization of the site in this concept plan. The planning board and city council both view this. In our discussions, we heard the council and planning board note that this is a catalyst opportunity for redeveloping Diagonal Plaza, and that policies indicate that there's a need for housing, and the developer is establishing a partnership with Boulder Housing Partners to implement the concept plan. And then, as we've discussed, the existing zoning has limitations for providing residential units on the site with that suburban density standard that exists under the BC1. So regarding the intent of the ordinance, it's important to emphasize that it's specifically applicable only to the proposed project and site. And it's important to note that the ordinance is not a comprehensive rezoning, rather it's specific to the proposed redevelopment of this site only, such that any site review plans that come before the review boards must conform to the stipulations, or the ordinance would expire. The ordinance modifies a singular aspect of the code, the open space standards of BC1 zoning for the site only. And the ordinance would permit a minimum of 15% open space for the site only. And the applicant will be required to demonstrate project consistency as well with the site review criteria related to open space, such that open space needs of the residents and visitors to the site will be met. And then the ordinance is based on the intent that's illustrated in the concept plan. So moving forward, there's an indication of what to expect on the site in site and use review. And then the ordinance ensures that inclusionary housing requirements will be met through a covenant prior to any residential building permits. Middle affordable housing requirement will be based on 25% of the entire development of all residential units approved in the site review, regardless of ownership, and the affordable units will be provided within the project. Any cash in lieu amount would be determined based on all units, market and affordable, to be constructed on the site. And it's important to note that any cash in lieu funds would support construction of affordable units. And as a result, the developer would support the affordable units in the same manner, whether they're provided on site or through land dedication. And then the ordinance would fulfill core values of the BBCP specific to the evolving sustainable urban form that is an infill redevelopment in partnership with Boulder Housing Partners, and would allow for a greater number of residential units than could be built under BC1 zoning, both market rate and affordable. And then similarly, revitalizing the underutilized sites in keeping with policy 2.03 that further articulates the city's preference for infill and redevelopment of sites rather than expanding the service area of our compact city. And then the ordinance would also address policy 1.10, jobs, housing balance, that states the city will seek opportunities to improve the balance of jobs and housing, and that this will be accomplished by encouraging housing and mixed use neighborhoods and areas close to where people work, encouraging transit-oriented development in appropriate locations. And this heat map shows where the existing jobs are within a half-mile to up to 2-mile radius of the site. And then similarly, the ordinance would address policy 7.11 that states that the city will explore policies and programs to increase housing for Boulder workers and their families, fostering mixed use and multifamily development in proximity to transit, employment or services, and by considering the conversion of commercial land use to allow for residential. And then further, the ordinance would also address policy 2.16 for mixed use and higher density development. That also indicates the city's desire to encourage well-designed mixed use and higher density development that incorporates affordable housing in appropriate locations, including commercial centers in proximity to multimodal corridors and transit. And so in this case, there's not only jobs in proximity to the site, but there's also transit, bike lockers, a lot of services nearby. So policy 2.16 at the bottom there, you'll note also notes the city's openness to creating new zoning districts revisions to FARs or open space, as is the case here, or parking requirements to achieve the mixed use. And then the ordinance would implement policy 5.01 that specifically calls out Diagonal Plaza as both a center where redevelopment is anticipated. And as council has noted, it's a critical opportunity site for redevelopment where the city would support revitalization efforts that are unique to that specific place. And so with that, concludes staff's presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions along with the applicant team, who I understand are on the call.
Thank you, Elaine. That was an excellent presentation. Council questions? I have one that I'll go ahead and start with. I flagged this to staff this afternoon. The first question I've got is the suggested motion language says to approve a development that exceeds the minimum open space per dwelling unit standards. I guess my question is, it seems to me that using fails to meet the minimum open space per dwelling unit standard would be more appropriate, but I was curious to hear if there's a reason that exceeds is a more proper legal word.
You know, we checked in with city attorney's office and we concur it could be changed. One recommendation might be to instead say does not meet, maybe a little less intense than fails to meet. I think the point is it's intended to create a more urban context, and the minimum open space per dwelling unit standards, as we've noted, is a relatively suburban type of configuration. I think what we're after here is a more urban configuration.
Thanks, that's perfect. So it appears in the title and the motion language, so you'd be comfortable with does not meet rather than exceeds? Sounds like, okay, super.
Yep, that should work.
Perfect. And so we'll try and note that in the motion. And then the second question kind of gets at exactly what you just said, Elaine. This open space per dwelling unit has been a thorn in our side for a while. How would we address that and get that changed and out of the code? I know it's not something we'll do with this council, but I just wanted to ask the question, how could a future council fix this suburban standard, which doesn't seem to apply very often?
Well, thank you, Sam. I'll take that one. So there's nothing on the books right now to study this. You're correct. This is an intensity measure and is not captured in the use tables work or any of the currently planned work. What I think that we should do is staff can simply identify this as a potential work item for the future council to consider, and we can flag it and bring it up for them to look at in the context of our other work.
All right, that's excellent. I will just make the point here to those who are continuing that this has been something that has been needed fixed for a long time. And so if there's room in the next work plan, I think this would be a good one, and it might be actually quick, but I'll let you guys and staff work that out. And then I've got Rachel and Aaron. Rachel.
Thanks, Sam. And I support your last point and us looking at that as someone who's continuing on. So thank you for flagging that. I just wanted to understand, there was one of the last slides talked about all affordable housing would be built on site, but then it also mentioned cash in lieu. And I was trying to figure out why we were talking about both. Like if affordable housing will all be on site, where would cash in lieu come into play?
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and I think it's essentially a default. In other words, if there is any affordable housing that wouldn't be built on site, it would necessitate the cash in lieu based on all of the different units. And maybe Kurt Fernhaber, if he's on the call, he could probably better articulate that than I'm doing right now. Kurt,
Elaine, I'm on the call.
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah. Good evening again, Council. Kurt Fernhaber, Director of Housing and Human Services. Rachel, it's a bit of a technical question as well. So technically, it can be two different sites. So they can sort of donate the land of that site. The land will be a value of X, and the cash in lieu would be a value of Y, and they would have to pay the additional amount to meet the total cash in lieu amounts. So simply by dedicating the land, which is an option, one of the 4 options within our IH ordinance, they would still be required to pay the additional cash in lieu to get there. So that's what BHP would use those resources to help cover the gap of constructing that development.
I think I'm hearing you say that even though it would be on the same plot of land right now, they would have to sort of donate that land and then cash in lieu to BHP, and that's how it would work out on site, but under a different owner.
Yeah, well, the intent in a broader sense is that that affordable housing is built on the site. So that's probably the first component of that. Sometimes projects come to you with the promise of certain outcomes of affordable housing, and this approach creates a scenario where that actually will happen through this ordinance. So that's sort of the starting point. And then the second is just the mechanism for how that occurs.
Okay, so I don't want to belabor the point, but I guess it just makes me concerned that maybe we're saying we're going to have it on site, but we're putting a default in case that doesn't happen, when I think if we all think we're saying it's going to be on site, that we would like that to be on site rather than to defer to cash in lieu at a different site. As you know, I saw some council members going like this when you just said, like, sometimes there are promises made and they're not followed through on. So I don't know if there needs to be language in there to shore that up. And I saw Bill Holicky, I think, off camera mute. So I don't know if he wanted to weigh in, but that was my question. Thanks.
Yeah, so Hella may also have more to add in there.
This is Bill Holicky with Coburn, and I can just, hopefully I can make this simple. Notice the language in the ordinance says that we need to be in general conformance with the concept plan that we submitted, and the intent is to do so. There are technical restrictions for how that affordable housing can be built on that piece of property in that location. And so, as Kurt was describing, there may be a mechanism that actually creates a land dedication to BHP, so they get that piece of land and then they build the housing on it. So no one's contemplating building the housing in a different location. It is simply trying to deal with the technical aspect of how compliance with our affordable housing requirements work, if that helps at all.
Thanks.
There is a sentence in the ordinance that does require that at least 25% of units will be permanently affordable. So that's to ensure that we actually see affordable housing on site, 25% of units.
Okay. Rachel, is that all your questions? Okay.
Thanks.
All right. I've got Aaron and Mary. Aaron.
Yeah, I guess I just have a couple colloquies to what Rachel was just talking about. I think Hella's point is that there is that sentence in the ordinance that says that 25% of all new dwelling units on the site will be permanently affordable. So I guess the mechanisms might be tinkered with a little bit, but we are guaranteed 25% on-site affordable if they want to take advantage of the reduced open space requirements. How is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. And then I also just wanted to plus one Sam's suggestion about the open space tweaks, the requirements for that. So Jacob, if you could put a bookmark in that, I'd love to discuss that with the new council. Thanks. That's all I got.
Awesome. Mary.
Yeah. My question, well, I guess and it's more of a comment. I was under the impression that open space requirement was actually going to be part of the site review updates that were being made. And I don't really know where that project is at, if it's going to be dropped or what. Was it part of that? And was I under a misunderstanding?
Thank you for that question, Mary. My understanding is that was never part of that. This is an intensity standard, and as a result, is not a part of that study. So this would need to be flagged as a separate work item.
So Mary, if I could colloquy, I was thinking the exact same thing and realized as I was writing a question about this to staff that was an intensity standard, so wouldn't fit under either site or use review stuff. So I had the same exact impression until a few hours ago.
Great, I wasn't the only one. And I wasn't the only one that read through that motion or that language of that exceeds piece, because I read it several times and it was not making any sense to me. So thank you for bringing that up, Sam. And then I guess the other question I have is, as part of this motion, could council include an amendment to the motion that would say that that would require an area plan to be conducted in parallel, or is that better left to the new council as a consideration for their work plan?
Jacob, I guess that's for you first.
Well, I can't speak to the powers of council. I do know that I would defer, first of all, I think, to the city attorney's office in terms of your ability to bind a future council. So that's one item. The other thing that I would say is that there's an issue, I think, of timing in terms of concurrence, because standing up an area plan requires significant resource in terms of staff time, number of staff, public engagement, as well as making sure that we have planned appropriately to conduct that. This project, however, in this case, is on a certain track. And I think if this passes, they would anticipate to go to site review relatively soon.
Okay.
So I think that we wouldn't be able to conduct that area planning process at the same time that this project would hope to move forward. But that is something that, again, we could flag for consideration along with our future work plan. And the council would look at that, I think, again, in the whole slate of the work that PNDS is proposing.
Okay.
I don't know if our city attorney's office wants to speak to that in any more depth.
I think you did a great job, Jacob, but if there's anything Hella wants to add, feel free.
No, I agree with that. And I think this special ordinance process was chosen to decouple this project from any longer area planning.
Okay, great. So that answers my question. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks, Mary. Mark.
My question is, are there a set of standards that we use to determine what projects are eligible for this kind of special treatment by ordinance? Or is it simply, do we like the project? I'm always a little leery of just simply exercising discretion, picking winners and losers in that fashion. And I'm wondering, is there any organizing principle behind which we make a determination in terms of size of the project or other qualities that determine whether we're going to use this technique to make a project viable?
That's a great question, Mark. Typically, the only time we've really exercised a legislative option in kind of the development review arena is to support a compelling community benefit. Most oftentimes, it's been the provision of permanently affordable housing being built on site.
Okay, thank you.
And Mark, if I could colloquy, this gets back to that open space per dwelling unit standard, because that creates all kinds of perverse incentives to make bigger units if you need less open space, if you build bigger units. So I'd say there's also an element of the community benefit of not using this inappropriate standard on this site. So I'd just offer that as that.
No, I just want to, I'm just asking the question as a matter of general principle. I'm not resistant to using it in this instance, but I would be a little concerned if we're using it as a series of one-offs, each picked by us because we happen to like this particular project. And so, that's why I'm asking, are there a set of standards that we generally use when making that determination? I have no problem with doing it here. And I believe the staff memo listed a number of other occasions when we have done it. but I'm just curious as to whether it's a kind of a haphazard process or whether we're doing it on the basis of specific criteria.
And I'll jump in and just add that those policies that we described in the memo and then this evening in the presentation are specific to a circumstance like this. And in particular, the policy that cites the desire for the city to revitalize the Diagonal Plaza and redevelop the Diagonal Plaza. So the perception that this is a great opportunity, it's a catalyst site for revitalizing Diagonal Plaza, I think was among the many considerations that we discussed at concept plan, along with the ability to do the affordable housing as part of the project.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions from council before we go to the public hearing? All right, great. Seeing none, we will move to the public hearing. We have 3 members signed up and then 1 who has been added. The 3 who are signed up are Lynn Siegel, Virginia Zukowski, and Chet Chazowski. And I believe I'll turn to Alicia. I believe, Alicia, we have another person signed up who is going to pool time. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. And his name is, let me pull it up here. We were doing emails for quite a bit there. Evan Freirich, Freirich.
Very good. And Evan will be pooling, I believe, with Virginia and Chet, correct?
That is correct.
And are all 3 of them in the meeting at the moment?
Brenda and I just verify it. Yes.
Yep, all 3 are present, Sam.
Okay, super. So to organize this, we have 4 people speaking, which means that there will be 3 minutes per speaker. Our 2 speakers will be Lynn Siegel with 3 minutes, and then Evan Freirich, pooling time with Virginia and Chet, which will give 5 minutes for Eric. So we'll start with Lynn with 3 minutes and then move to Eric with 5 minutes. So to kick us off, Lynn, this is about the Diagonal Plaza and you have 3 minutes.
You wait just a minute with me because my computer's about to die off. I've got to plug it in. Or you can go with the next one and then me.
Okay, that sounds good. We will go then to Evan Freirich. Evan, you have 5 minutes when you're ready.
Good evening, Council. This is Evan Freirich. I live at 745 Arapahoe, Boulder, 80302. All of you should have received my email, which discusses the options to have an increased amount of affordable housing at Diagonal Plaza. I believe the project should have at least 40% affordable housing, and that would result in an additional 43 affordable units. One of the things the council should have noticed is that every concept plan the developer has presented has increased the number of units. It went from option 1, 235, option 2, 259, and at this point we're up to 289. Those are approximate numbers. 2 other local citizens have joined me so that my speaking time could have been increased. One of them is Ginger Zukowski, who previously spoke to you. She lives in the mobile home park at the corner of 30th and Valmont, a retired teacher. It is her desire that there be more affordable townhomes for sale in the development and some preference be given to folks who live in that neighborhood. This development hopefully will be a catalyst, but it should also set a precedent in Diagonal Plaza, especially for residential development. I, like many in our community, believe that we can gain a substantial amount of affordable housing from this underused site. I believe only requiring 25% of the units be affordable should not be applied when a special exception is requested. I believe this site deserves a community benefits type analysis. And I know the city has struggled with coming up with a community benefits policy, especially dealing with high rises? Well, this is a perfect one to use that kind of analysis. The developer here, in exchange for getting increased density, is not giving the city any more affordable housing. It's just doing what it's legally required to do. And where you're making a special exception, there should be an increase in the amount of affordable housing. Also, by doing a special exception, the developer is avoiding a great deal of delay that would have been involved in a rezoning. I have to wonder whether or not if this substantial delay might impact their opportunity zone tax benefits, which is unique to this development. If this development goes forward, the other plaza properties will also be greatly enhanced because it raises an expectation that they may receive expanded development rights for residential development, something they don't have now, and only be required to do the legal minimum in Boulder. Owners have carried properties at diagonal plazas for many, many years. They paid taxes based upon the commercial real estate value. Now that the city is considering to expand the uses there to include a much denser residential development, I believe they've been saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in the carrying costs for that investment compared to what they would be paying if they had a similar intensity of residential development in their property. In my email, I looked at one aspect of the project. At 289 units, I tried to demonstrate that basically they would normally be allowed to have 61 units. And it would cost, the land cost would be about $156,000 per unit. Under this plan, now they expect to pay somewhere around $33,000 per unit in land costs. That's a savings to them of $123,000 per unit. That savings of millions of dollars could go towards providing additional affordable housing. Even at 40% affordable housing units, their land cost is still only going to be around $41,000 per unit. In my email, I detail how I reached those conclusions, primarily from assessor's records in terms of what the value is. To give you a real world example, imagine building an 8-unit apartment complex in Boulder and only paying $328,000 for the land. As you can see,
Mr. Fryrick, your time is up. Thank you very much. We appreciate the email you sent us and your testimony tonight. If you'd like to send us any more, you can send it to council@bouldercolorado.gov. Thanks again for your input. And with that, we will move to the final speaker, Lynn Siegel. Lynn, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, this shouldn't be in the Oz. No, I recommend further moratorium on the Oz. Oh, by the way, Sam, I still don't have my time up on the screen. Honestly, I don't. Nobody.
It's up on my screen, Lynn. You can keep going.
You're seeing, but you aren't seeing what I'm seeing. I'm just seeing my name and a black window. Seriously. Eric will confirm that. Fryrick will confirm it.
Lynn, why don't you keep going and I'll keep the time for you. Thanks.
Yeah, it's just, I don't like to be, like cut off, it's really irritating. Boulder has 8% affordable housing. That's what I got from all kinds of affordable housing from the staff this week. 8%. Okay, that's nothing, and that shows you where 25%. And I mean, we used to have 20%. We had 20% when Michael Bosma did 311. And then he went ahead and did Frew House as his affordable component, 44 units. In fact, he went above and beyond. He offered 106 units. He promised that. What happened? Nothing. He backed out of it. Now they are doing cash in lieu. This is unacceptable, unbelievable, and unacceptable. And 25%, which we rose it from 20 to 25%, is also completely unacceptable. What we need is a comprehensive, integrative analysis of what it costs to operate one human being in this town and how many of those we can afford to build structures for. Because as it is, it's unplanned. This is really poor urban planning. It's just build and build and make deals along the way. And what happens is, like with Alpine Balsam, the same thing. We bought it for 40 million. Now we've put 100 million into it to gut the pavilion and tear down everything. And there's more to go. So we have to make our money back, don't we? And the way we make it back is we sell it to the, highest bidder. And then it goes out as unacceptably expensive housing. And we get wealth inequity in our town, more and more wealth inequity. We get more and more homelessness. Nobody can talk about anything at the council candidate meetings except homelessness, except police, except affordable housing. And we need to be starting to talk about the arts and culture in our community, not constantly about housing. So I say for Diagonal Plaza, there needs to be a whole lot more affordable housing there. And it needs to not be in the same cycle of despair where the wealth inequity is increased. And I don't know how
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Lynn. Your time is up. Appreciate your input. And with that, we'll bring this back to council. Council, any other questions, comments, feedback, or motion? I am going to, Mark, go for it.
Sorry. Actually, I would like to throw this one back to Bill Holicky. How did it transpire that we ended up with the minimum of 25% affordable housing? Mr. Freerich's analysis seems to imply, let's move off of 40%, which is very high, but that there might have been some room to go a little bit higher, 30%.
Sure, and we have Laura Scheinbaum from BHP and Jarvie Worcester from TCR. So I'll give you a little bit, and then those two, as the developers and owners, can probably fill in a bit more.
Okay.
But I would just remind us all that this property has sat fallow for decades, and it has not been financially viable up until this point, which is why nothing's happened there. This ordinance and this density allowance is really the absolute minimum, clearly, that's needed in order to make this happen. And remember also that there are very strict private sector restrictions in the PUD in terms of what can be built and what can be approved. Right now, you cannot do any residential whatsoever on the property. There's cross easements for access and utilities and everything else. So while a back of the napkin analysis might look like there's a lot of extra in any project here, there's not. So I'll turn it over to Laura and Jarvie to maybe mention a little bit more about that.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council. It's Jarvie was with Trent McCoy Residential, and Laura, who's our partner on this project. Elaine mentioned previously we have a partnership agreement to work together for the affordable housing and the market rate housing. While I appreciate the presentation and the email from the gentleman who spoke earlier, the reality of the math on that is it's just not accurate. As Bill mentioned, there's a lot of variables. I have personally have confidentiality requirements that preclude me to get into too much detail, but I can tell this council based on what Bill said, the dynamics of this site, obtaining this site, and being able to work with the surrounding owners require this density to really make the deal function and be something that we can move forward. So that's how it was contemplated when we did go under contract with the land, and it's been kind of our approach to underwriting and evaluating the feasibility of what we get.
Excuse me. Is the representation that you're basically acquiring at about $40,000 a door an accurate one?
Like I said, I'm not at liberty to speak to the details of my purchase and sale agreement. I can tell you that the numbers that were presented are wrong.
Well, I mean, that doesn't give us a lot of room to analyze, because if true, I would think that would be a pretty attractive price. If it's not true, I'd like to know what the order of magnitude of error is. Can you speak to any of that?
I don't. I think the reason I'm a little bit caught off guard is I didn't know, and I'm surprising to get a question on the cost of land as it relates to how the city processes or doesn't process a requested ordinance. I think Elaine did a good job of explaining the reasons this makes sense. Essentially, this takes a property that the city has identified as a catalyst from, its existing zoning at sort of roughly 20 to 25 affordable units. And this ordinance would create close to 60, 65 affordable housing units. So it is creating the community benefit that is cheap, that is requested. I will tell you the number, there is an order of magnitude higher than the $40,000 per unit. Yeah, that's kind of the extent of where I can discuss.
As it's clearly a state secret, not much more I can ask of you. Thank you.
I'd just weigh in here and see if Boulder Housing Partners would like to say anything about this.
Good evening, Mayor Weaver and council members. I'm Laura Scheinbaum. I'm Director of Real Estate Development for Boulder Housing Partners. We are super excited to be part of this opportunity. In terms of the math, I again can't speak to that as Jarvie had suggested, but in terms of the value coming to BHP and the community that we will be able to create in a campus of affordable housing that we'd be able to create with the adjacency of the additional units and a park and the pedestrian access and the vehicular access, 25% perhaps is the minimum as required by code, but it's getting this sort of perfectly sized and efficient space for BHP to own and manage within an existing community. So again, I think that for us there's tremendous value in there just for us as an organization and the community and at large. So
thank you, Laura. Adam.
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised about not hearing about numbers. That's pretty normal in this industry, as we've all seen. My question, though, is I realize this isn't a concept plan review, but one of the things that we've dealt with in the past when we're creating permanently affordable housing on site is the building materials and sort of standards of the house are a little different than what ends up being built for the market rent units. Do we have any knowledge about what the plan is there? Will they be comparable, or is there going to be big differences in build materials and end result?
Yeah, I can speak to that. There are requirements in the housing code, and I'm sure that Kirk Fernhaber can chime in, but it is not allowable to reduce the standard significantly from the market rate to the affordable. There are minimum requirements that the affordable housing has to meet in terms of livability standards, size, storage, materials, interior and exterior. So all of those things are codified. And to be blunt, that was probably a result of some bad actors many years ago trying to do, Adam, what you're kind of contemplating here. So it's not allowable. The second part of this is, if you look at the Boulder Housing Partners sites throughout the city, I would encourage you to look at the quality, especially the things that they've done lately. It's phenomenal. If you look at what they created at 30 Pearl and the quality of the buildings that BHP puts into service, I would put them against most market rate projects in the city. So while the materials may not be exactly the same, for example, the Boulder Housing Project is close to their existing diagonal court building, and the goal is to make that a campus feeling. So there's probably less brick, less of an urban feel and more of a residential feel there. It will have a different architecture, and that's purposeful. it certainly will not be a lower quality product. And Laura, I'm sure you're champing at the bit to address that one because I know BHP is very proud of the quality level that they create.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And Adam, I hear you on your concern there, and I can assure you that it is our goal to always develop to a standard that is seamless with the rest of the community. So it's the same quality with maybe a few small things like a countertop material or something like that. But it is high quality, excellent construction, and really integrated, and you can't really tell. I mean, if you were to drive through Boulder, it's been my great pleasure to take some council members and some of my board members, and it's I point and people are really amazed of the product that's in the portfolio that we own and manage. So it is always our intent to make sure that it is as strong a product as absolutely possible, so that we won't be cutting corners, I can assure you.
Thank you for those answers. It's good to know that things like that are codified in some way. And I definitely don't see it on the exteriors of any of the units. I've just heard about things like windows, just the long-term aspects that aren't noticeable necessarily within the first few years of build, but may show up a decade or so later compared to the for-profit units. So just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you for the answers.
Thank you, Adam. Bob.
I just wanted to thank Adam for raising that point and kind of maybe pile on to what Laura said. I had the great pleasure of serving as council's liaison to the Boulder Housing Partners Board for 3 years. And so I know firsthand the quality of the products that they build. And in fact, what BHP did a few years ago is they had some, that was not always the case. And there were some properties that were built, in the 70s and 80s that were not high quality, Adam. And what BHP did is they spent millions of dollars going back through those properties one by one and bringing them up to commercial standards, to standards that we all enjoy now. And so not only do they build new things very, very well, they actually went back and spent a lot of money. They didn't have to do this. They spent a lot of money bringing old things up to today's standards. So they are very passionate about this.
And then one more item on something that was already brought up is, Mark, you were asking about costs. There's an important piece to keep in mind. All sites are not equal. And some sites that are generally ready for development have it's like buying a used car versus buying a new car. This site needs to be reclaimed. And there's a lot of things that are extremely expensive in reclamation. The stormwater is currently contained in asphalt detention ponds, which doesn't come close to meeting our acidic standards. It all has to be redone. All of the utilities, not just the utilities into each site, but the area regional utilities that are going to serve the whole this development and the future developments all have to be redone. There are no streets, there are no sidewalks. Those are all public improvements that will be put in place. It's an urban site, so all of the parking will be structured at a cost of, and this is architect math, right? So take this with a big grain of salt. I'm not a contractor, but $40,000, $50,000 or $30,000, $40,000, something like that for every structured parking space, as opposed to an asphalt parking space on grade, which is, literally an eighth of that cost. So when you look at all of those things, those expenses come with buying this used car, and whatever the cost per door would be, you really can't compare site to site without understanding the infrastructure improvements and the typology of construction that are going to go with that. So that's just something really critical to keep in mind.
Thank you. If I can colloquy, thank you, Bill. That's a very substantive response. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you all. Thank you both. Any other discussion? If not, I think I'm going to put a motion on the table. I know it's unusual, but it's one of my last chances, so I'm going to do it. I would like to move that we adopt Ordinance 8512, granting authority to the approving authority under Title IX Land Use Code BRC 1981 to approve a development that does not meet the minimum open space per dwelling unit standards for property in the Business Community 1 district located at 3320 28th Street at Diagonal Plaza, authorizing the city manager to execute documents that will secure affordable housing on the property and setting forth related details.
Second.
Great. We have a motion and a second. I think that this is fantastic that we are doing this. This site needs a catalyst very badly. I do acknowledge the issue, but before I go on, I see your hands up, Sandra. May I?
Yeah, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I didn't hear that very last part where it's underlined and motion to adopt, or did you say that?
I tried to say motion to adopt. Which part are you talking about?
I'm just going to jump in if I may, Mayor Weaver. And this was the recommended language change that
I'm sorry, I read it from the packet, so that was not the appropriate one.
I tried to get it up there quickly.
I see. Okay.
Hopefully we can.
I will start over again.
Thank you. Sorry
thank
about
you
that.
both. No, I appreciate it. I read from the packet. I'm going to move to amend on second reading the title of Ordinance 8512 to read Ordinance 8512, granting authority to the approving authority under Title IX Land Use Code, BRC 1981, to approve a development that does not meet the minimum open space per dwelling unit standards for property in the BC1 district located at 3320 28th Street at Diagonal Plaza, authorizing the city manager to execute documents that will secure affordable housing on the property and setting forth related details. And then I would also move that we adopt Ordinance 8512 with such a title amendment.
Second.
All right. Sandra, did I get everything in there? Awesome. Okay, great. This site needs love, and I think this is a great way to bring love to the site. It also was unfortunately constrained by the open space per dwelling unit standards, which would have given us products that we were not very happy with. I want to commend it, the Coburn and everyone involved by putting the affordable units on site, as everyone understands that is a goal that we have on this council and as a city, to have a mixture of affordable and market rate together. I think this ordinance will enable the change that we want to see on this site that desperately needs to be brought into the 21st century or the 22nd century. So with that, Bob, I'll go to you.
You said it well, Sam. Thanks.
All right, thanks. And with that, I believe that we're ready to vote, unless I'm missing something. Alicia, roll call, is that correct?
That is correct, sir. Councilmember Sweatlet.
Yes.
Wallach.
Aye.
Weaver.
Yes.
Yates.
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
Brockett.
Aye.
Friend.
Yes.
And Nagel.
Aye.
Sir, Ordinance 8512 is hereby adopted as amended.
Excellent. And I will just point out, and maybe I need to hear from the attorneys on this as well, by putting those different words in the motion language for does not meet, the intention was that the title of the ordinance also would replace exceeds with does not meet.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, super. Very good. All right. I think we are done with that. Thank you all to everyone who participated in this. I so look forward to seeing this project come in and seeing that asphalt go away. And with that, Alicia, can we go to the next item, please?
Yes, sir, of course. Item next on our agenda is item number 8, matters from the mayor and members of council. 8A is the council discussion on disbanding the CU South Process Subcommittee.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I think this is pretty obvious what this is. We have appointed a subcommittee and it's time to disband the subcommittee. And I think this needs to be done by vote. And so if we discuss it now and we agree, I think we'll bring forward whatever language we need on consent at the next meeting. So with that, I'll just turn to council. Is there any concern or objection to disbanding the CU South Process Subcommittee? Aaron?
It was so much fun. I hate to see it go, but I guess it's time.
This is probably a question for the legal department. Do we need to disband this? I thought this was by invitation from the city manager. Maybe I don't have that right.
So this is the process subcommittee, Bob.
Okay, so this is the one that council did appoint.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a subcommittee that we appointed that held, I think we've had 3 different sets of council members in the life of this process subcommittee.
Yep.
So yeah, no, this is the actual subcommittee, not.
Okay. That's fine. Well, I support it.
Great. And Sandra, what do we need to do to bring this forward on consent at the next meeting? Do you have everything you need to put a consent item together?
Yes, I believe so. I don't think I need anything. Just to be clear, I don't know if it's required to, if the council's required to take action on disbanding, but if it's council's desire to do so, we can certainly move forward on that and bring it on consent for the next meeting.
I'll leave that up to you what the proper thing to do is. I know that we, I'm not sure if we voted, but I know that we appointed the subcommittee. I assume that we voted to do so. And so I'm not sure what it would take to disband the subcommittee. Often the subcommittees live for a long time. In this case, it was temporary. So I'll let you have a look at that and we'll just make sure to do whatever we need if we need to bring something forward on consent at the next meeting.
That sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. Any objection to disbanding the process subcommittee? I'm not seeing any. So we've got unanimous support to do that. And Alicia, you want to take us to the next item?
Yes, sir. Next, we have item 8B, which is the council discussion on adding gun violence prevention ordinances to the work plan to include readopting the assault weapon ban.
Excellent, thank you. And I think this is kind of a look ahead and teeing staff up. I'll turn to Rachel, and Rachel, maybe you can talk about this because it would go into the next council, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So as everybody probably remembers, after the mass shooting in March, state took a look at the preemption law, state lawmakers, and they repealed preemption of like where the state said that cities could not pass their own gun laws, basically. So we now have the opportunity to pass and implement new gun laws as cities, thanks to that legislation. And shortly after that law was passed, a couple of us got together, other city leaders from nearby communities, and talked about creating a sort of suite of gun laws that cities might want to pass. And so over the summer, Moms Demand Action and Giffords, both national organizations, created and drafted some model legislations that cities could look at. It's currently being reviewed, the model legislation, for the likelihood of surviving legal challenges, but I think that's just about done. So other cities are starting to present to their city councils a request to move forward with this legislation or versions of this legislation. And Adam, I think, invited a couple of us to speak at the consortium of cities a few months ago. So it's known that this is in the works up and down kind of in our county, at least, and up and down the Front Range a bit. So the concept is to collaborate with other Front Range cities moving forward on sort of passing a suite of gun laws, possibly on the same day, but that hasn't quite been worked out. Cities would pass whatever their communities feel is best, but there are a number of reasons that it's beneficial to work as a region on this. Sort of broadly speaking, like federal gun laws would be the best, and then state would be next best, and region is better than cities. So that's part of the concept. And so my request for tonight is just a nod of 5 to invite staff to support the regional effort, because I think it will probably move forward prior to our retreat, which would be the next logical time that I could ask for a nod of 5 to get this added to the work plan. And I'm not asking for us to decide or work through which laws we might be interested in passing, but due to sort of the timing and a bumpy holiday schedule and bring a new council up to speed, wanted to ask for the green light tonight for a nod of 5.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Perfect. And I'll turn to Nuria. And Nuria, just a question, do we need a nod of 5? Happy to provide one if you'd like one, but can you tell us what staff plans are for supporting the gun violence prevention work going from this council into the next council?
I would say this, that if we are, and I appreciate the question, and thanks, Rachel, for bringing it up. If really it is to support the work that's going on with the consortium and then seeing where we are and thinking about what policies are coming up, then I don't think we need a not of 5. I think where we'd need a not of 5, if there are items from that support that say, oh, now we want to add this or build more, then we'd certainly bring it back to council to say this is what the impact is. But I don't think the way, and forgive me if I'm wrong, Rachel, the way you have expressed it in terms of being able to support some of the work that's already happening forward with the consortium, we can certainly do that at the moment.
That would be great. I think that what will happen is there will be sort of a quick turnaround effort where we need to vet the model legislation and make sure that we are supportive, and that's probably more city attorney's office, I would think, than any other department. So I guess I just didn't want to not have a not of 5 in place and to green light and for staff to be able to work on it if there are quick things that need to get done and we haven't talked through it.
No, I agree. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree, and certainly open to legal if they want to weigh in. But in talking to Carl too, I just believe the major lift of supporting, of doing the model legislation would probably be the consortium. And we would certainly be supporting that. If we were drafting it all on our own, then that's a whole different concept. And that would add a lot more to CAO. But certainly as we move forward, we can certainly support how the consortium is moving forward and then adding our review look to it. But I will also just let Sandra, because we have not spoken to CAO, to see if she had other thoughts.
Thank you, Nuria. So, I would also agree that we could support this work, that a lot of the work's already been done. And I appreciate all the efforts of all of the consortium and you, Rachel, and bringing it forward. We were intending to make a change to our existing ordinance anyway. So that could be something that could be coupled together with these new proposed changes and brought forward all at once, or however, whatever council's will is, we can certainly accommodate that.
That sounds great. And just to clarify, the consortium isn't doing work on this. It's Giffords and moms, and then a couple of us. So the consortium is not going to vet the proposed ordinances for us. Each city needs to do that for themselves. They're just giving us model ordinances, which our cities would have to decide which we want to adopt, and our attorneys would need to vet and tailor them to our cities' charters and desires. So I don't want to overstate that. I think that the consortium work is going to be like getting together for the same day and sort of logistical things, but it's not the actual ordinances.
Okay. Aaron.
Sorry, I was slow because I think Bob was ahead of me.
Oh, so Bob, is that an old hand or a new hand? I'm sorry.
Old hand.
That's what I thought. Okay, Aaron.
My mistake. Okay, thanks. Thanks so much, Rachel, for bringing this forward, and very glad to hear, Nuria and Sandra, that you can move forward on this without us specifically authorizing it. And I would just say on behalf of someone who is going to be here for the next council, that if you do hit a point where you need further council authorization, please come to us without delay to the new council for that if you need it.
Thank you, Aaron. And I was going to say exactly what Aaron just did, so I'll just +1 that. It seems like we should be doing all the work we need to be able to get this passed in alignment with other cities in the region. And so if there is a question about, does council really want us to spend all this time on it, please come back, because I think the answer is probably going to be yes, but we're in this transition period between councils. So let us know if anything is slowing down the progress until the next council is seated. Adam.
Yeah, in that vein, I think it might be important to maybe not necessarily appoint, but at least authorize a temporary council member to be coordinating with the consortium, since I will not be around to make that happen. I think Rachel is an obvious choice since she's been doing most of the work. But there will, I think there might be a meeting before you all appoint the next consortium representative. And in that case, I want to make sure the work is able to continue.
Is there any reason, Adam, I don't know the consortium, I haven't sat on it. Is there any reason Rachel can't just attend with you? And
certainly not. I just won't be elected anymore when the next meeting happens. So
it happens before November 16th?
No, it happens after November 16th.
I
So
mean, after, okay.
It's after I'm gone, but before you all appoint new people, I believe.
Okay. Is there an ask for council action here?
Just want to make sure that it's okay if communication needs to happen, that Rachel is, given the okay by council to do that.
Okay. Is there any objection on council to Rachel stepping in to meet with the consortium if there's a gap? I don't see anything. So Rachel, I think you are deputized to go to the next consortium meeting if the next council hasn't yet appointed a representative to it.
Okay, thanks Adam for bringing that up.
Okay, any other discussion of this point at all? Gun violence prevention. All right, I think we've got that cleared up. I think we got nods from city attorney's office and city manager's office, so we're good to go. And we will hear if there's a need for any further authorization for work. Awesome. So that item is done. And Alicia, I believe we're at the end of our agenda. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Awesome. Council, any other items we should talk about? Staff, anything we need to touch on? Great. Seeing no other items, I will gavel this meeting closed at 9:31. Everyone have a great night, and I'll see you next week.
Good night, everybody.